Chapter 1665. The pair of pestles were 2 feet long and shiny black. They looked ordinary and even a little ugly. When Ching waved them around, they stirred up a pungent smell. Dui Tianzhong guessed that perhaps it was because the pestles had been pounded with chili and garlic. The madwoman must have played the role of a kitchen maid in the Taoist sect. More importantly, when a Tai Sui stream of light blasted out, the madwoman's 2 pestles were firmly in front of her. Although she was shaken and fell to the ground several times, the pestles remained intact. The Tai Sui stellar energy could not penetrate them. I can't tell its grade or material. Dui Tianzhong's eyes shone as his brows furrowed. As the son of the Tai Sui emperor, he could be considered someone who had seen the world. He had seen all kinds of divine soldier and had even been lucky enough to see an emperor weapon once. However, he could not tell what was wrong with the pestles in Ching's hands. However, he was certain that the pestle's material was strong enough to withstand his Tai Sui stellar energy and faintly refine it. It was true that Ching had been sent flying, but she was not injured. It was as if she had been pushed several times. No matter what it is, it must be extraordinary. Dui Tianzhong had a strong intuition. He stepped forward, his palms glowing with orange light. As Ching waved them again, he directly used his hands to take the pestles. Clearly, he was prepared to take them for himself. Bang! There was a heavy sound. The moment their palms touched, Dui Tianzhong's knees went weak. He thought to himself, what kind of freak is this? This woman's strength was beyond his imagination. He had almost been knocked to his knees. However, Dui Tianzhong still took them. He opened his palms, his fingers tightly gripping the pestles. Ching's eyes widened. You can actually take my pestles head on. Dui Tianzhong was so angry that he almost vomited blood. Who did she think he was? He was the son of the Tai Sui emperor. Dui Tianzhong growled angrily. He could not be bothered to respond. His fingers tightened on the pestles as Tai Sui stellar energy erupted from his body. Under the force of his palms, Ching's body was lifted off the ground. You want to take my pestles? This time, Ching panicked. In her mind, the medicinal pestle seemed to be more precious than her life. Seeing that Dui Tianzhong was plotting against her pestle, she hurriedly turned her head and shouted at Sherdong. Shitty, he stole my pestle. Sherdong had already seen it. His palms drew yin and yang. Saint force poured into both of his palms. 2 balls of light struck out at the same time. A loud whistling sound was heard, one in front and one behind. Yang was real. Yin was illusory. The palms alternated. It was difficult to distinguish the real from the fake. The bystanders did not know which one contained the true power. Dui Tianzhong didn't care at all. He only had eyes for Ching's medicinal pestle. It had withstood the Tai Sui stellar energy several times without being damaged in the slightest. At the very least, it was a rare sage artifact. It was just right for him to use before he obtained Emperor Yuan's inheritance. Bang! Bang! 2 sounds. Sherdong's double extreme palms accurately struck Dui Tianzhong's chest. However, they were unable to shake his Tai Sui body and were dispersed by his Gang Qi. At this time, Ching was holding the end of the pestle with both hands, and her whole body was lifted into the air. Give me the pestle, and I'll spare your lives. Dui Tianzhong was completely anxious, and he spun Ching around frantically. Ching only felt a gust of wind hitting her face fiercely. Her eyes were seeing stars, and her stomach was churning. She almost vomited, but her hands held tightly onto the pestle as she said, I won't give it to you. I won't give it to you even if I die. Then you can go to hell. Dui Tianzhong's expression was ferocious and terrifying. He stomped his feet on the ground, and an incomparably terrifying Gang Qi erupted from his body. Vaguely, there seemed to be a huge Tai Sui Dharma shadow hanging down and attaching itself to his body, making him look like a god. Ching cried out in pain. The Gang Qi released by Dui Tianzhong was too fierce, and she couldn't hold it firmly. Her eyes were filled with tears as she watched her fingers separate from the pestle bit by bit. Finally, with a whoosh, she was thrown into the chaotic battle, and the pestle also fell into Dui Tianzhong's hands. Ah ha ha ha! Dui Tianzhong laughed proudly. Senior sister. Sherdong saw Yin Qingqing fly away, and his heart suddenly started to beat rapidly. Battles were breaking out all around the Emperor Cave, and no matter where she landed, it would be extremely dangerous. Moreover, at the top of the Emperor Cave, the elders of the three sects were engaged in an intense battle with the terrifying Headless Death Emperor. If Senior Sister flew too high, Sherdong was extremely worried. In the next second, he saw a wind-like afterimage streaking past. Yin Qingqing's suspended body miraculously landed, and that figure rushed straight towards Dui Tianzhong. It was incomparably fast, much faster than Sherdong's waterwind steps. It was Qin Hao. Qin Hao already knew that they were no match for Dui Tianzhong. Seeing that the green pestle had been snatched away, how could he continue watching? After all, this pestle was refined by him using the Red Lotus fire. He had no choice but to act. His master couldn't possibly allow others to bully his disciple. Qin Hao used the waterwind steps to disperse the force from Yin Qingqing's body. Then, he pointed his finger forward, aiming for Dui Tianzhong's forehead. It was the golden finger. Dui Tianzhong snatched the pestle and was in an incomparably good mood. However, he suddenly felt a sense of danger descending. He saw Qin Hao make his move. The alchemist of the Taoist herb garden, an elder in name only, and his cultivation was even weaker than Shi Lang's. He clearly wasn't a threat, but there was a voice in his heart that frantically warned him not to be careless. As a first-rate genius, Dui Tianzhong never doubted his intuition as a martial artist. The alchemist of the Taoist herb garden was definitely not as simple as he appeared. At this moment, he swung the pestles in his hands down heavily, drawing out two streaks of black and gold light that fiercely chopped towards Qin Hao's head. It was a good opportunity to test the power of the weapons. Seeing this, Qin Hao immediately retracted his finger light and countered the move. His dragon-breaking bone hand wrapped around the pestle, strangely pressing down on Dui Tianzhong's palm. He chuckled and said, "Junior, the pestle was given to my disciple by me. You are not my disciple, so it is not fated with you. Give it up." Chapter 1666. The two pestles came crashing down, carrying the Tai Sui stellar energy that was powerful enough to collapse a mountain. However, when they came into contact with Qin Hao, their power dissipated. What was even more ingenious was that Qin Hao's arms coiled around Dui Tianzhong like snakes. Before Dui Tianzhong could see clearly, he was pressed against Qin Hao's palm. Give up? He had seized the two pestles. How could he give up just because of Qin Hao's words? However, as his hand went numb, Dui Tianzhong felt as if he had been electrocuted. His hands trembled, and he involuntarily let go. He could only watch as the pestles returned to Qin Hao's palm. His opponent had snatched the pestles empty-handed. Moreover, he had snatched them from the hands of the Tai Sui Emperor's son. Master is master after all. He is not someone I can compare to. Sherdong was thoroughly convinced. Shi Lang lay paralyzed on the ground. When he saw this scene, his eyes widened. To be able to snatch the pestles from the Tai Sui Emperor's son, Li Chuji, was not simple. Qingqing. Qin Hao was expressionless, as if he had done something very ordinary. He casually threw the pestles to Yin Qingqing. The latter was overjoyed to have regained them. What kind of move is this? Dui Tianzhong stared at Qin Hao. No one in Nanjiang City could snatch the pestles from his hands, not even Lu Guang. However, Li Chuji had done it with a cultivation of the 6th level of the profound sage realm. If you want to learn, I can teach you. Qin Hao replied with a smile. Although the two sects were at war, as an emperor-level powerhouse, everything was nothing in Qin Hao's eyes. Naturally, he would not take a junior seriously. Are you worthy? Dui Tianzhong felt humiliated. Any elder of the Tai Sui Mountain had a cultivation higher than Li Chuji's. If I teach you, it's naturally enough. If you become old man's disciple, cough cough, if you kneel 3 times and kowtow 9 times and sincerely become my disciple, I can teach you a few moves if I'm in a good mood. You have to call Sherdong and Qingqing senior brother and senior sister. Also, Remember to ask your father to invite me for tea. Qin Hao said, Master is master, asking the Tai Sui Emperor to invite him for tea. Sherdong learned something new again. I'll send you and your master to the afterlife. Dui Tianchong could not tolerate being looked down upon by Li Chuji, the most despicable person in Taoism. The Tai Sui astral winds raged wildly as strands of terrifying threads drifted about, slicing and devouring everything. They transformed into millions of rays of light that wound forward. Master, be careful. Sherdong was shocked. However, they saw Qin Hao with his hands behind his back, the soles of his feet glowing as he stepped on the water wind steps leisurely. No matter how the thousands of silk threads swept towards him, he was as agile as a roly-poly toy. His body swayed left and right, almost sticking to the ground as he walked. There was a hint of devilishness in his dexterity, which once again made Sherdong and Lang dumbstruck. This movement technique, Sherdong was completely convinced. Using the water wind steps at the same time, his master's attainments were monstrous. Immediately after, he followed suit and used the water wind steps to join the battle. Qin Hao's movement technique was very nimble, but anyone with discerning eyes could tell that he had been avoiding Dui Tianchong all this while. Evidently, he did not have the ability to contend with him. Moreover, the disciple couldn't just watch his master get beaten up. Boom! The raging flames collided with the golden blade, causing a deafening sound to ring out. On Dui Tianchong's side, because of Qin Hao's interference, he was able to successfully stall for time. On the other side, the battle between Suani and Lu Guang was extremely thrilling and intense. Both of them were very talented. Suani was from a branch family. Although he was not the son of the Taoism sect master, he had the Qilin Dao fire. This was the most orthodox talent of the Suani and was highly valued by the sect. For this reason, Suani spoiled Suani as if he was his own son. The Suani all knew that their ancestor had a peerless genius who possessed the Qilin Dao fire. That person's name was Feng Dong. Of course, Sherdong was powerful not only because of the Qilin Dao fire. He also had a second ultimate essence soul, the mountain river creation divine diagram, which could reverse the great Tao of heaven and earth and create thousands of creations. Suani couldn't compare to Feng Dong, but even with the Qilin Dao fire, he could still look down on everyone in the Taoism. One must know that Lang of the Sword Valley was simply beaten up by him. Lu Guang was also very impressive and could be called a rare genius in Nanjiang. He had the power of 2 spirits, and his spirit grade was as high as the 15th grade. He improved rapidly and later surpassed Lin Chong, becoming the undisputed number 1 disciple of the Void Strike sect. Now, his cultivation was comparable to Suani at the 7th stage of the Profound Sage realm. At this moment, he was fighting with Suani and was using a type of spirit power. Beast Spirit, the golden-winged rock. Lu Guang absorbed the spirit into his body and fused with the beast spirit. His appearance changed greatly. His facial features were like that of a bird, and a pair of golden rock wings grew from his back. The sharp light slashed through space, and it was as sharp as a sage artifact. I didn't think that there would be someone like you in Nanjiang City other than Dui Tianchong. It seems that the Suani clan did their best to cultivate you. It's a pity that you're at your wits' end against me. Lu Guang's eyes flashed with a fierce light. The wings of the rock slashed through and split the Qilin Dao fire. A second light shone on his body. At this moment, his spirit power burst out between his palms and condensed into a domineering halberd. He waved it with a blinding light and stabbed it forward. Soul Essence, the formation-breaking halberd. Suani roared. His spirit merged with his soul essence and turned into a living sage beast. His 4 limbs turned into beast legs. He raised his head and spat out a mouthful of magma-like Dao fire, which was rolling and melting to bury everything in front of him. A terrifying gust of wind blew. The golden-winged rock's spirit power distorted the momentum of the Dao fire. A sharp formation-breaking halberd light penetrated the flames. There was a puff sound, as if it had pierced in a flesh. You've done your best. Lu Guang laughed coldly. He looked at the flames in the sky slowly dissipating. Suddenly, his expression changed. He realized that he had not pierced Swanee. The formation-breaking halberd was in the mouth of the Chelan divine beast. At this moment, Swanee's entire body was trembling. After activating two souls, he was suppressed by Lu Guang's spirit power. Their cultivation levels were similar, but his spirit power was not as strong as Lu Guang's. This was the first time he felt such immense pressure from a prodigy outside of Taoism. But no matter what, he could not let Lu Guang take the imperial coffin. For the Swanee clan, he was willing to give up everything, including his life. The beast's mouth held the formation-breaking halberd tightly. Under the pressure of Lu Guang's spirit power, Swanee retreated with great difficulty. At the same time, Lu Guang was pulled even further away. He wanted to drag Lu Guang away from the imperial coffin. "You're courting death," Lu Guang roared. His claws, which had turned into sharp claws, stomped down heavily. With a puff, they pierced through Swanee's beast scales and sank into his shoulders. His spirit power raged wildly, constantly destroying Swanee's flesh. Even so, the Chelan divine beast was still slowly retreating step by step. The beast's mouth that held the formation-breaking halberd did not let up. So what if he died? Taoism has been in decline for so long. If we let you take away the inheritance, Taoism Mountain will be completely finished. I can't let my aunt witness such a cruel scene. The Chelan divine beast's throat let out a hoarse cry. Its muscles contracted desperately, like two invisible palms clasping tightly onto Lu Guang's claws, even though these claws were sharper than blades. "You will not give in. Swanee, give up." From afar, Qin Hao saw this scene. Chapter 1667. The power of the essence soul was mysterious and unpredictable. Anything could be used as a soul. The reason why essence soul martial artists were stronger than ordinary martial artists was because they had special innate skills and soul power, which was more lethal than vitality. Martial artists who had two kinds of essence souls had more initial soul power than those who only had one. Swan and I was at a disadvantage because of this. In terms of realm, he was on par with Lu Guang. In terms of resources, Swan and I grew up in a superior environment, and his foundation was no worse than Lu Guang's. However, he was suppressed by the other party's two souls. Lu Guang's golden rock soul power was constantly rushing into Swanee's body, destroying it along the way. If he did not give up, the consequences would be dire and his life would be in danger. However, Swan and I turned a deaf ear to Qin Hao's shouts. The Chelan's eyes were bloodshot as he clenched the formation-breaking halberd tightly. Anyone could obtain the inheritance except for Lu Guang from the sky-striking sect. The three sects had previously said that Lu Guang was extremely talented. After today's battle, Swan and I did not know how powerful Dui Tianchong was, but Lu Guang's abilities were definitely not weaker than Dui Tianchong's. Once this person obtained the inheritance, he would definitely be reborn and rise to power. No one from the three sects would be able to stop him. Lu Guang would be a great threat to the sect in the future. Even if he risked his life, he would not let him obtain the inheritance. Initially, I thought that I would be the first one to finish the battle. Who would have thought that you and a master would appear out of nowhere and give Lu Guang the spotlight? Qin Hao did not wait for Dui Tianchong to finish speaking. He turned around and spat. Coincidentally, Dui Tianchong was speaking, and the spit hit his throat. Cha! Dui Tianchong stopped in his tracks and stood rooted to the ground as if he had lost his soul. His face gradually turned pale, from white to green, and then to black. Then, he bent over and vomited madly, his fingers digging into his throat. He had eaten Li Chuji's spit. How could a dignified elder of the sect do such a thing? It was extremely despicable. Sure Dong, Qing, go help Swan and I. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Qin Hao pretended to take deep breaths and ordered the two of them. Master, can you deal with Dui Tianchong alone? Sure Dong was worried. I'm your master. What do you think? But, no buts, there's still Shirlang. If we're late, Bai An's life will be in danger. Qin Hao roared loudly, perfectly displaying the emotions of an elder who was worried about his disciple. Senior sister, Let's go. Sherdong did not dare to tarry. Together with Qingqing, they rushed out as if they were flying. Leaving Qin Hao alone to deal with the Tai Sui Emperor's son might be very dangerous. Moreover, Shi Lang had lost his fighting strength. However, there was really no other way. I'll kill you. As soon as the two of them left, Dui Tianchong's mad roar was heard in the air. The Tai Sui Emperor's favorite son had completely lost his demeanor. His face was as ferocious as an evil spirit. Endless light showered down and bathed Dui Tianchong, making him look like the incarnation of the Tai Sui god. In an instant, all of his combat prowess erupted. His 5 fingers struck out, and a terrifying storm of divine light rushed forward, engulfing Qin Hao's back. Qin Hao was too lazy to look. He moved continuously with the water-wind steps, leaving behind one shadow after another. It gave people the illusion that they would be swept into the storm at any moment. However, they were just a little bit away. In short, the situation was very dangerous. The more it was like this, the more ferocious Dui Tianchong's pursuit became. The two of them weaved in and out of the various battles, running all over the place. Qin Hao could not help but sigh in his heart. He had been wise in his 2 lives, and when had he ever been chased so miserably? Even the southern region's crown Prince Ning Tianxing did not have the qualifications to chase him everywhere. Now, he was being forced to the point of losing his integrity by a junior. However, he had no other choice. If he directly exposed his Emperor realm cultivation and killed everyone from the 2 sects, this trip to the Emperor's tomb would have been a waste. His 8 years of hard work would have been in vain. Bang! A glaring claw light burst forth, and for a moment, blood splattered. Baian's sacred Qilin body was hit by the impact and fell heavily in the distance. When Sherdong and Qingqing rushed over, they saw that Baian's soul power had dissipated and it had returned to its human form. Its shoulders were in a terrible state, and its collarbone had been forcefully broken by Lu Guang. Baian, Sherdong shouted. The wound hurt just by looking at it. Don't worry about me. Stop Lu Guang from taking the inheritance. Baian shouted loudly. Its eyes were bloodshot, but its fighting spirit did not diminish at all. Come on. If one comes, I'll kill one. If 2 comes, I'll kill a pair. Today, even the heavens cannot stop me. Lu Guang wanted to turn around and open the door, but he realized that Sherdong and Qingqing were rushing over again. The Taoist disciples were pestering them, and he was burning with anger. He flapped his golden wings, and a formation-breaking halberd in his hand spat out light. The power of his 2 souls was unparalleled. He flew forward and stabbed the halberd at Qingqing. Qingqing blocked with her 2 pestles. The halberd light collided with the halberd and exploded into a violent blast. Her entire body was sent flying, and before she landed, she fainted. So strong. It was unknown who was stronger between Lu Guang and Dui Tianchong, but in terms of physical strength, Lu Guang was far superior to the Tai Sui prince's son. After all, the golden-winged rock soul was innately able to increase the strength of a martial artist's flesh. Senior sister. Sherdong was shocked. Qingqing could not block the halberd. Don't be distracted. Give it your all. Tao Wu's palms gathered yin and yang, and the Qilin flames merged into them. He sent 2 flaming palms at Lu Guang, but his opponent's halberd easily tore apart the martial pavilion's yin and yang dual polarity palms. Tao Wu spat out a mouthful of blood and fell beside Sherdong. He had been fighting with Lu Guang for so long, and he could not hold on any longer. Tao Wu. Sherdong looked at this Taoist genius. In the past, the disciples of the sect all said that if anyone could fight with Lu Guang of the air-striking sect, it had to be Tao Wu. In fact, Tao Wu did it. After a bitter battle, he was still no match. This is the strongest of the Taoist sect? Haha, what a joke. Lu Guang held the formation-breaking halberd and laughed wildly. Before entering the cemetery, he had always thought that Tao Wu would be a good opponent. Even if he was not as strong as Dui Tianchong, he would at least be able to entertain him. But it turned out that his expectations were too high, and Tao Wu was too weak. In the Nanjiang region, Who can compete with me, Lu Guang? Lu Guang flapped his golden-winged rock wings and floated above Shi Dong's head. He looked down at him as if he was an ant. At this moment, Qin Hao's voice came from afar. Lu Guang turned his head abruptly. Who would dare to fight with him? My disciple can defeat you. Qin Hao stopped in his tracks and said with a smile, Go to hell. Dui Tianchong's ghostly howl was heard, and a terrifying Tai Sui divine light slammed into Qin Hao's back. His body leaned forward and his head crashed into the stone wall. The entire emperor's tomb shook and piles of rocks fell. In an instant, Qin Hao was buried under rocks. Master, Shi Dong felt his head shake. It was as if Dui Tianchong's palm had struck his heart. Seeing Qin Hao's body covered in rocks, with only his head sticking out from the cracks, his master's face was covered in blood. I'm sorry. Master really can't run anymore. I have no complaints about dying for the Taoist sect. It's a pity. I can't see my disciple awaken his innate bloodline before I die. I feel extremely regretful, guilty, and self-reproachful. Dong, live well, live on. Qin Hao spoke intermittently. Every time he spat out a sentence, a mouthful of blood flowed from his mouth. Finally, his head tilted, and he died tragically in the pile of rocks. Master, Shi Dong let out a heart-wrenching cry. Far away, Dui Tianchong was stunned. He looked at Qin Hao in horror and said in a crazy voice, I didn't do anything. I didn't touch him. Chapter 1668. Dui Tianchong really wanted to kill Qin Hao. He was a dignified Tai Sui, handsome and dignified. He had always been surrounded by beautiful women, and everyone knew that he was well-mannered. When had he ever been humiliated like this? That mouthful of phlegm disgusted him to the core. His determination to kill Qin Hao could not be changed even by the heavens. Otherwise, he would be too ashamed to face anyone. Everyone he met would think of Li Chuji's saliva. However, that palm strike did not hit its target. Li Chuji was as slippery as an old loach. It was as though his entire body was covered in oil. Dui Tianchong clearly saw that Li Chuji had avoided the palm strike. However, that strike had hit the rock wall ahead of time, creating a hole. Who would have thought that Li Chuji had crashed into the hole? The falling rocks had also been shaken off beforehand. It was not what Shi Dong had seen. At this moment, Dui Tianchong felt extremely wronged. He was sullen. If he had killed Li Chuji with his own hands, he would have been happy. However, what was the truth? He had not hit his target at all. Li Chuji had killed himself in a daze. Dui Tianchong's efforts had been for naught. Who could understand his feelings of disappointment and grievance? He didn't know if it was because he was so tense that he was hallucinating, but at this moment Dui Tianchong saw Li Chusan, who was buried in the pile of rocks, open his eyes and smile at him. His smile was filled with gratification and satisfaction. When Dui Tianchong looked again, Li Chuji had not changed. He looked like he had stopped breathing. I'm really seeing a ghost. Dui Tianchong rubbed his eyes frantically. However, in reality, he was not hallucinating. Qin Hao's real cultivation level was comparable to a Archmaster. In this vast Water Jade Saint Nation, even if Fairy Qianning's master, the Water Jade Emperor, came personally, she would not be able to do anything to him. Qin Hao had done all this to agitate Shi Dong. If Shi Dong was overly grieved, perhaps it could activate his Xiantian bloodline. Qin Hao wasn't just making things up. He had evidence. In the past 8 years, he had tried all kinds of methods, but none of them worked. Only once did he set up an illusory array to make Shi Dong remember the scene of him losing his parents when he was young. It turned out that Shi Dong's parents were killed by demonic beasts. At that moment, Shi Dong radiated an inconceivable power. His body contained surging soul power that wanted to break out of his body. Unfortunately, perhaps he knew deep down that he had been struck by Qin Hao's formation, but he didn't take it seriously. In the end, the soul force that was about to awaken retreated with regret. For this reason, Qin Hao was extremely vexed. But this time it was different. He had sacrificed himself for a righteous cause and had been brutally killed by Dui Tianchong. He had truly died in front of Shi Dong. It was time to test their 8 years of master-disciple relationship. If his disciple had him in his heart, he would definitely use his grief as a source of strength to stimulate his innate bloodline and soar to the heavens to avenge his master. Many folktales spoke of this. Dui Tianchong. Hoarse and angry, his voice contained extreme depression and grief. At this moment, Sherdong's eyes were bloodshot. He was like a lone wolf who had witnessed the tragic death of his parents. The blood in his body instantly ignited and exploded. Every meridian in his body seemed to explode, and his heart felt a piercing pain. It wasn't me. I'm innocent. Dui Tianchong wasn't afraid of Sherdong, but anyone who saw those devouring eyes would feel uncomfortable all over. It was as if they would pounce on him at any moment and bite him to death. Sherdong's chest rose and fell violently. He walked step by step towards Dui Tianchong. Saint power swept out, surging like never before. His eyes were filled with immense grief. He had killed someone, but he didn't even have the courage to bear the consequences. Was he trying to shirk responsibility? 8 years ago, when he had entered the Taoist sect, he had been a youth with no clothes to cover his body. Qin had watched him grow up day by day. He had fed and clothed him, taught him attentively, and endured hardships as if he had been reborn as a parent. Even though the Taoist sect had always despised him, he couldn't even go to the Valley of Swords if he wanted to learn the sword. But in his master's eyes, he was proud. There wasn't a moment when Qin Hao didn't look forward to seeing him succeed. Sherdong would never forget that hopeful look in his eyes for the rest of his life. For this reason, he had even lied to him that he had the congenital bloodline. At first, Sherdong had believed that he had it. But in these 8 years, he had tried everything, and he no longer had any hope. But at this moment, he would rather have the congenital power. At least that way, his master would die in peace. Swoosh! A ray of halberd light sliced through the air. The turbulent force seemed to be able to destroy everything. Sherdong knew that it was Lu Guang. He infused his saint power into his right fist, tried to use the power of the War Emperor again. However, the moment he punched, the golden light that he had used all his strength to condense in his fist suddenly dissipated. It was obvious that he didn't have enough strength. Following that, the halberd light pierced through his Saint Chi and sent a piece of torn clothing flying. Thump! Sherdong fell to the ground. He had evaded the aqua wind steps in time. Even so, his left shoulder was still cut by Lu Guang's formation-breaking halberd. There was a burning pain in his flesh. You can't even take one strike from my halberd, and you want to take revenge on Dui Tianzhong? Lu Guang's rock wings flapped lightly. The formation-breaking halberd in his hand casually swung a few moves. He looked at Sherdong with an extremely humble gaze. This person was even worse than Ruoyan. He was a piece of trash. Within the pile of rubble, Qin Hao witnessed this halberd strike. Although he was worried, he couldn't help but sigh helplessly. Although his feigned death had stimulated Sherdong's earlier appearance was as if his emotions had been swallowed up by hatred. In truth, he hadn't dug out his hidden strength. How could he awaken this bloodline power? Phew! Dui Tianzhong let out a deep breath. He looked at Sherdong with a pitiful gaze and smiled coldly. Sherdong was indeed a piece of trash. Lu Guang couldn't even take one strike from him. He was nothing to worry about. All right, let's ignore this pitiful worm for now. Time is of the essence. Now that the imperial coffin is right in front of us, how should we deal with it? Dui Tianzhong asked, ignoring Sherdong. If there's an imperial weapon, you take it. I want the inheritance. If there's only the inheritance, we'll see who it chooses first. The one who doesn't get it should withdraw. Lu Guang replied. Since the airstrike sect had fallen out with the Dao sect, it would not be good for them to become enemies with the Tai Sui mountain. That would not benefit either side. Moreover, the headless corpse was a huge threat. It would be irrational for him to fight with Dui Tianzhong now. All right, we'll do as you say. Dui Tianzhong stepped forward, preparing to open the coffin with Lu Guang. When he passed by Sherdong, he glanced at him and said sarcastically, "Trash." Creak. Sherdong's 10 fingers sank into the soil. He slowly clenched his fists and blue veins popped out. Why? fast. Master trusted him so much, but he had disappointed Master time and time again. The power of the bloodline. If he really had the innate bloodline, Lu Guang and Dui Tianzhong would not have to fear. Master would not have died today, senior sister would not have been knocked unconscious, and Bin would not have had 2 of his collarbones broken. He would not have exhausted all of his soul power and could only lie on the ground and scream like a madman. The murderer of Master was trying to split the fruits of victory with the arrogant Lu Guang, but Shi Dong could not do anything. Why did things turn out this way? Initially, father and mother trusted him and told him about the glory of their ancestors. They had high hopes for him, but in the end, father and mother died. Now, Master trusted him as much as they did, and Master was dead. Heavens, you took everything from me. I want you to give it all back. Shi Dong suddenly stood up and clenched his fists. He raised his head and let out an angry roar. The holy light, which had been gradually weakening, surged out like a floodgate opening as his fighting spirit soared. It was unstoppable. At this moment, everyone fighting in the Emperor's tomb seemed to feel the arrival of an inexplicable power. Dui Tianzhong stopped in his tracks. He felt something behind him and wanted to turn back to take a look. Don't bother about that crazy trash, Lu Guang said indifferently. He could not take a single blow from Dui Tianzhong. So what could he do? At most, he would just stab Dui Tianzhong to death after taking the inheritance. Otherwise, his mood would be affected by his wailing. Buzz. At this moment, an intense orange light shone from behind them. As the 2 of them stepped forward, they saw their shadows lengthening. Lu Guang and Dui Tianzhong realized that their shadows were constantly shortening, which meant that the light behind them was getting stronger. Dui Tianzhong stopped in his tracks again and was about to turn back. Opening the Emperor's coffin is more important, Lu Guang said. The formation-breaking halberd in his hand disappeared, and he pressed his hands on the coffin lid. Dui Tianzhong immediately gave up on his desire to turn back. He quickened his pace and walked to Lu Guang's side, pressing his hands down as well. Rumble. The Emperor's tomb suddenly shook as if it had been attacked by an inexplicable external force. The orange light behind it faintly changed color, becoming brighter and brighter. It was like the light of stars, and there was more than one. Lu Guang. Dui Tianzhong's head turned back uncontrollably. I will count 1, 2, 3. Let's do it together. Lu Guang was very calm. He was only worried that the Emperor's coffin was too heavy. What if the 2 profound sages could not open it? Dui Tianzhong did not respond. Are you ready? Lu Guang began to count. 1, 2. Before he could finish his sentence, a roaring sound suddenly came from behind him. It was very oppressive and extremely powerful. Large amounts of dust began to fall from Lu Guang's head. The Emperor's tomb seemed like it was about to collapse. Murderous aura. There was a very strong murderous aura behind him. Even though Lu Guang was not afraid of anything, he felt a chill run down his spine at this moment. His expression finally changed. He subconsciously looked at Dui Tianzhong beside him and wanted to ask, why don't we turn back and take a look together? Then, Lu Guang realized that Dui Tianzhong had already turned his head. His mouth was wide open, and he was looking straight ahead with an extremely shocked expression. His body was faintly trembling. Then, Lu Guang immediately turned his head. The scene that entered his eyes made him exclaim, Essence Soul Talent. In front of him was Shi Dong, who seemed to have been forgotten by everyone. He was the trash that Dui Tianzhong and Lu Guang had called him. His black hair was wildly fluttering in the wind. A bright starlight array appeared under his feet out of nowhere. His entire body was gushing with soaring Saint Qi. Within the orange Saint Qi, there was a large amount of starlight that seemed boundless and endless. At this moment, the sky of the entire Emperor's cave changed. The vitality light on all the martial artists' bodies disappeared. Even the elders of the 3 sects who were fighting the headless corpse in the sky, including the Tai Sui Emperor, who had descended with a wisp of his will, were suppressed by the starlight that descended out of nowhere. The space was completely still. The rotting corpse energy was expelled. Even the headless corpse emperor stopped moving. It seemed that the will that controlled it was shocked. At this moment, everyone's eyes were focused on one person, Sherdong. Sherdong's expression was pained. The mutated Saint Chi in his body was raging, constantly transforming his body of martial arts. Strands of starlight of the great path fell from the sky. At first, it was just a dot. Later, it became densely packed. The entire sky above the Emperor's cave was filled with the power of the stars. Countless stars formed a subtle connection between each other, forming constellation patterns. The endless starlight swallowed everything. Everyone felt as if they were in a vast galaxy. In the end, the endless power of the constellation patterns turned into shadows. They were mysterious and unfathomable. All of them covered Sherdong's head and disappeared from the top of his head. When the last strand of starlight disappeared, everyone was freed from the galaxy and returned to the scene in the Emperor's cave. Essence Soul Star Force, Lion King Bo Tion. Everything returned to silence. Then, an explosion erupted from the silence. Sherdong seemed to have changed into a different person. He spat out a cold voice. Then, he raised his fist and punched forward. This punch broke through the air and was suffused with endless starlight. It swallowed Dui Tianzhong and Lu Guang. Midway, the starlight evolved into a line of stars. It was insufferably arrogant. Its forelegs shook the earth and the mountains. Dui Tianzhong's face turned pale and his soul trembled. Chapter 1669. Gathering the power of the stars in the heavens, gathering the river of stars, and evolving the starry sky. This was an extreme talent that encompassed the universe and led to the great Tao. Not to mention low-level battles. Even if one stepped into the Emperor realm, the great Tao of the Star River was terrifying. It was no wonder that Eastern Sky's senior brother repeatedly praised Shirmu in the Divine Palace. The great Tao of the Star River was so powerful. If not for senior sister Muri's influence, Shirmu's ability would not be weaker than Eastern Sky's senior brother. Not only him, but Taoism's Bo Changji's talent could seize the yin and yang of heaven and earth and reverse the Big Dipper. The three geniuses of Taoism were truly unparalleled. At this moment, Sherdong had fully awakened the talent of his primordial spirit. His bloodline had reached ancestral awakening, and he had grasped the same power of the great Tao of the Star River as Shirmu. After being cleansed by the soul power of his bloodline, his physique was reborn and had undergone earth-shattering changes. He was no weaker than any heirs of the overlords. Lu Guang and Dui Tianchong were doomed. No matter how high the golden-winged rock flew, how could it surpass the Star River? Even if Dui Tianchong was the incarnation of the Tai Sui god, he was only a minor god. How could he shine as brightly as the stars in the heavens? Everything in the Emperor Cave was silent. Everyone watched the fist of stars fly away. The elders of Tai Sui Mountain, void-striking sect, and the Tai Sui Emperor who had descended with a wisp of wool were all shocked. Sherdong's awakened power was terrifying. Even if Lu Guang and Dui Tianchong were extraordinary talents, they were insignificant in the face of the stars in the heavens. Silently, tears of excitement flowed from Shirqing's eyes. She had exchanged souls with the Taoism sect master, so the father and daughter naturally knew what kind of power Sherdong had unleashed. The great Tao of the Star River was the supreme soul power of Shirmu, one of the three peerless geniuses in Taoism's most glorious era. With the power of all the stars, Shirmu had defeated all the warriors of an era. At that time, only Xidong of the Gui clan and Bo Changji of the ancestral patriarch could compete with him with the yin-yang limitless body. Other than that, no one in the East continent and the entire southern border could surpass him. Now, Sherdong, a wandering orphan who was not recognized by the Shur clan, had awakened the talent of the Shur clan's strongest ancestor. Who would dare to say that he was not a member of the Shur clan? Now, it was not only related to the Shur family. Sherdong's bloodline was related to the rise and fall of the entire Tao sect. The reason why Tao Wu was so favored in Taoism was because his Qilin Flames of Tao was the first soul power of the strongest ancestor of the Tao tribe. Even though it was not the more powerful Qian Kuan creation scroll, it still belonged to the orthodox bloodline. Shi Dong's bloodline power was of a higher level than Tao Wu's Qilin Dao fire. It was a supreme talent that coexisted with the universe creation diagram and the yin-yang limitless body. As long as Shi Dong did not die prematurely, it was entirely conceivable that he would become the second patriarch Shimu, or even a living patriarch Bo Changji. The heavens pity our Taoism. The choked voice of the sect master of the Tao sect came from Qing's mouth. Far away in the Tao mountain, the sect master of the Tao sect, Xie Biechio, who was using the soul transfer technique, was already sobbing uncontrollably. Even Elder Yu, Elder Qi, and the other two sect masters who were watching the battle were crying. It was a moving sight. Qila, a terrifying blade light pierced through, and an elder of Tai Sui Mountain let out a mournful howl. His body had been cleaved in two by the crescent blade of the headless corpse emperor, causing blood and organs to splatter everywhere. Yuan venerate martialists condensed their spirit consciousness. Even the weakest Yuan venerate could maintain their spirit consciousness temporarily if their physical body was destroyed. However, there was simply no chance to escape. Almost as soon as the body of the elder of Tai Sui Mountain left his body, it was completely engulfed by the deathly aura in the sky. Hold on! The Tai Sui Emperor roared, and an extremely violent Tai Sui Gang Qi burst forth as he desperately pounced on the headless corpse emperor. He could no longer care about Shi Dong. No matter who obtained the inheritance, the only thing he could do now was to use all his strength to stall the headless corpse. As for whether the inheritance would ultimately fall into the hands of Dui Tianzhong, Lu Guang, or Shi Dong, it would depend on the abilities of the three juniors. The Tai Sui Monarch made his move. Luo Qing, who had transferred her spirit consciousness, Elder Wu, who was wielding an emperor-grade sacred sword, and Elder Song, who was from Tai Sui Mountain, all cast aside all distracting thoughts and stopped the headless corpse emperor at all costs. If they were distracted, the elder whose body was separated from his body would suffer the same fate. Even their spirit consciousness would not have a chance to escape. The upper echelons of the three sects once again engaged in a fierce battle with the headless corpse emperor. On the other side, Lu Guang saw that Shi Dong had awakened his bloodline power, and the power of the stars flying out of his fist had transformed into a starry sky lion. He took a step forward and flapped the wings of the great golden-winged roc. The powerful beast, soul power, and sacred power in his body blended together as he blasted out a punch of his own. Bang! The starry sky lion and Lu Guang's fist collided. Endless starlight dissipated and the lion disintegrated immediately. However, Lu Guang was sent flying backward. His waist slammed heavily into the heavy imperial coffin. With a loud rumble, a section of the heavy imperial coffin was slid out. Lu Guang felt that his waist bones were about to shatter. It was evident how terrifying Shi Dong's power was after his bloodline awakening. You're finally doing something. Again. Lu Guang's eyes were filled with fighting spirit. He grasped the void, and the formation-breaking halberd appeared in his palm again. He opened both of his souls, and his aura continued to increase. His body rushed forward, and the formation-breaking halberd pierced towards Shi Dong's chest. However, at this moment, no one noticed that the lid of the heavy imperial coffin that had been knocked away had shifted. Through a pitch-black crack, surging death energy was wreaking havoc from within. Shi Dong crippled him. Fuji saw that Shi Dong had pushed Lu Guang back with a punch. His blood was boiling. For the first time, he felt that Taoism was about to rise. He was excited and happy about it. Shi Dong ignored everyone and stood there calmly as if he did not hear anything. The formation-breaking halberd was getting closer and closer to his chest. The sacred power that filled his body was dazzling. However, his expression was extremely cold. Even his eyes had lost their black color and turned completely pale. The state of nothingness. So that's how it is. Shi Dong's black hair danced in the wind, and his consciousness seemed to have yet to wake up from the state of awakening. He was still in a vast and boundless world of nothingness. He had been repeatedly humiliated by Dui Tianchong and Lu Guang with an incomparable sense of guilt and guilt. Just now, his rage had reached its peak, and he had developed a twisted mentality of destroying everything. Yet at that moment, he had suddenly calmed down and recalled Qin Hao's teachings. He had once again stepped into the concept of nothingness. Until now, his consciousness was still wandering freely in the void. He could capture the invisible wind, fire, thunder, the five elements, yin and yang, the mountains and all things. Besides that, he also found something. A self, another self that seemed to have been forgotten. So, the limitless martial arts that Master taught me was not to completely forget everything. Instead, it was to find the original me in the forgotten. Sherdong let out a shallow breath. He watched as Lu Guang's formation-breaking halberd came closer and closer. The light it emitted almost pierced his clothes. Suddenly, his palm was wrapped in dazzling starlight. He grabbed the halberd firmly. His right hand, suffused with yin and yang qi, slammed heavily on Lu Guang's chest. With a loud bang, golden feathers fell from the sky. Lu Guang raised his head and spat out blood. Due to the pain, his facial features were severely distorted. A sunken palm print appeared on his chest. "Are you satisfied with this palm strike?" Sherdong's pupil-less eyes stared coldly ahead. The 9 martial meridians in his body were connected in an instant. The terrifying yin and yang palm force mixed with the dazzling astral soul power rushed into Lu Guang's body. Lu Guang felt as if his internal organs were being crushed. He screamed unbearably, "Dui Tianchong, what are you waiting for?" The wings of the golden-winged rock became more and more illusory, as if they would disappear at any moment. Sherdong's palm strike had almost shattered Lu Guang's soul form. He immediately asked Dui Tianchong for help. Dui Tianchong was shocked. Was he really that strong? After his bloodline awakened, Lu Guang's golden-winged rock body could not withstand Sherdong's palm strike. How similar was this scene? Previously, Lu Guang had also defeated Sherdong with his halberd. However, the two of them had now swapped positions. 10,000 threads of qi condensation. Dui Tianchong did not dare to be careless. The Tai Sui squall raged around him. Endless golden airflow swept forward, turning into thousands of threads that attacked Sherdong, wanting to kill him. Sherdong's left hand gripped the formation-breaking halberd tightly. His terrifying eyes looked at Dui Tianchong. Immediately, he withdrew his right palm from Lu Guang's chest and smashed it forward. Wong. The space shook violently. Amidst the raging saint power, a giant astral serpent appeared out of thin air. The serpent's body shone with dazzling starlight. It swept forward wildly, rushing into the thousands of threads. The threads laid out by the Tai Sui squall were extremely tough and sharp as blades. They continuously cut the giant astral serpent, piercing holes one after another. However, its forward momentum was unstoppable. It broke through the blockade and ruthlessly slammed into Dui Tianchong. The latter was like a kite with a broken string. After the heavy blow, his feet left the ground and he flew up, sitting on the lid of the imperial coffin. If not for the lid, he would have fallen into the coffin. Wah! He spat out a mouthful of blood. The surface of Dui Tianchong's body glowed with starlight. Sherdong had actually penetrated his Tai Sui squall and injected his soul power into his body. Amazing. Seeing this, Dui Tianchong's taut nerves finally relaxed. He spread out his bloody arms and lay flat on the ground. He no longer had any worries about the upcoming battle. This battle belonged to Sherdong. Does it hurt? When you hit my master, did you feel the pain he endured? Sherdong flung the formation-breaking halberd away like he was throwing away trash. He flung the formation-breaking halberd away along with him. Lu Guang could not stop him at all. Sherdong was like a soulless person. He walked towards the imperial coffin, the whites of his cold eyes locked onto Dui Tianchong. The starlight wreaking havoc around his body became more and more resplendent. It was as if his entire body had been swallowed up by the starlight and turned into a galaxy. I didn't kill him. Dui Tianchong rolled down from the coffin and hurriedly explained to Sherdong. At this moment, Dui Tianchong had completely lost sight of Sherdong's figure in front of him. All that was left was an incomparably intense starlight. The endless starlight flowed, and there seemed to be an arm rising from within. Immediately after, Dui Tianchong felt his throat tighten as though someone was strangling him. He was lifted up from the ground, and his hands desperately pressed against his neck. He wanted to breathe, wanted to open his mouth to speak, and his legs kicked wildly. However, the invisible hand that was strangling his neck was too strong to resist. Halberd move, rock dance. Lu Guang's roar came from behind. He flapped his wings, and the soul power in his body erupted to the extreme. The formation-breaking halberd in his hand drew out a fierce blade of light that blasted towards the starlight. At this moment, he had no choice but to admit that Sherdong was really strong. "You're the first one to make a move, aren't you?" Sherdong's cold voice came from within the starlight. He only wanted to kill Dui Tianchong and avenge his master. However, Lu Guang had repeatedly obstructed him. Since he wanted to seize the inheritance so badly, Sherdong might as well send him on his way. Chapter 1670. Sherdong withdrew the power that was suppressing Dui Tianchong. He had just awakened his innate soul power and could not split his attention to deal with two first-rate geniuses. He turned around, and the soul power in his body raged. Streaks of starlight rushed forward from Sherdong's position like a meteor shower, and the sound of something breaking through the air could be heard. Lu Guang held the formation-breaking halberd and flapped his wings. He flew forward like a golden-winged rock, and the halberd light was unparalleled. It broke through the starlight and rapidly approached Sherdong, thrusting his halberd forward. "Get down," Sherdong shouted. He placed his palm on top of his head and pulled with all his might. Suddenly, a huge meteor fell from the sky and smashed into Lu Guang's back. The sound of bones cracking came from Lu Guang's back, and he felt incomparably heavy. The halberd lost its aim, and he fell at Sherdong's feet. Bang! Sherdong raised his foot and kicked. His foot, which contained the power of the stars, was extremely heavy. The kick caused Lu Guang's mouth to twitch and his eyes to sway. His body was stuck to the ground, and the rock feathers scattered all over the ground. "You're too arrogant." Dui Tianchong gasped for breath, his eyes filled with rage. He and Lu Guang were both 7th-level profound sages, but they were still defeated by a 4th-level profound sage, even when they worked together. If news of this spread, the Tai Sui Emperor and the striking Void Dao Emperor would lose their dignity. Boundless astral energy surged, setting off a terrifying storm. Dui Tianchong's body merged with the storm as if he had become a part of it. The storm crushed everything in its path, tearing the ground apart. A ferocious face appeared above the storm, wanting to swallow Sherdong. When cultivated to the extreme, the Tai Sui astral energy could merge with a cultivator's will, and soul. Dui Tianchong's cultivation obviously could not achieve this, but it was enough for him to merge his astral energy with his martial technique and perfectly unleash the power of his martial technique. At this moment, he had turned into a formless storm of astral energy. With enough soul power, he could no longer be injured by Sherdong. As for Sherdong, he would only be at his mercy. Rumble. As the terrifying storm came crashing down, the corpses of the dead martial practitioners along the way, the scattered weapons on the ground, and a large number of boulders were all swept up into the storm. It was as if the storm had put on a strange armor, and when paired with Dui Tianchong's savage face, it was an extremely shocking sight. A gust of wind blew behind Sherdong's back, and he was under immense pressure. His body leaned forward uncontrollably, but he immediately turned around and forcefully withstood the pressure. He saw Dui Tianchong's face above the storm, and balls of dazzling starlight continued to gather in Sherdong's fist. Sherdong threw out dozens of punches in succession, and even though they caused the storm to distort, he was unable to destroy it. Do you really think that you're invincible just because you've awakened your bloodline? You're looking down on the pre-heaven energy of our Tai Sui tribe. I'm going to make you pay for this. A battle emperor's golden light pierced through Dong's fist, and the power of countless stars in his body flowed towards his arm. As Dui Tianchong let out a scream, a huge fist shadow pierced through. No matter how many martial practitioners' corpses were stuck in the storm, or how many boulders were used as protection, they were all torn into nothingness by the starry sky fist light. Pua, in an instant, the storm was scattered by the fist. Dui Tianchong's hair was disheveled as he rolled on the ground. It was as if his heart had been struck by Dong's starry sky fist force, and he kept vomiting blood. There was no longer any arrogance on his face, only desolation and misery. What kind of power did Dong's fist force contain? How could it be so strong? He was only at the fourth stage of the profound sage realm. It was unimaginable and unbelievable. The profoundness of the Nine Palaces Battle Emperor art had completely exceeded Dui Tianchong's understanding of martial arts. Dong did not look at him. Before his bloodline had awakened, he had almost scattered Dui Tianchong's Tai Sui stellar energy with one punch. Now that he had awakened his bloodline, Dong's physique had been cleansed by the power of the great Tao galaxy, and he had sufficient soul power to support it. The second time he fought Dilly was even more powerful than before. This punch not only pierced through the storm, but also completely scattered his opponent's soul. Dui Tianchong was severely injured and no longer had the strength to fight. Don't worry, I will make time to properly entertain you. After leaving behind these words that made Dui Tianchong fall into the abyss, Dong stepped forward with the aqua wind steps. Starlight flickered under his feet. With the support of his soul power, his movement technique was so fast that it was like he was a completely different person. Even a heavenly saint would not be able to match him. At this moment, Lu Guang's body had been sent flying a few hundred meters away from the center of the Emperor's cave. He had been kicked to the edge by Dong and slammed into the stone wall, causing cracks to form on the wall. After that, he did not even have time to catch his breath. A starry figure rushed in front of him like a gust of wind, and a palm pressed down. With a bang, it landed on Lu Guang's chest. He had been hit twice by Dong's palms before, and this time it landed on the same spot. Lu Guang's sternum was severely caved in, and terrifying starry energy seeped in. It was like thousands of sharp blades cutting into his organs. Lu Guang's heart-wrenching screams echoed in his emperor's cave. Aren't you very arrogant? Dong looked down at Lu Guang, just like how Lu Guang looked down at him. You bastard. Lu Guang gritted his teeth. If he had known this would happen, he would have regretted it. He would have ended Dong's life earlier. Thinking of this, he held the formation-breaking halberd in his hand and raised it to stab at Dong. It was impossible for Dong to crush his martial way and cause his Tao heart to sink. Seeing this, Dong bent down and punched again. Endless starry fist light separated Lu Guang's right palm from his arm and broke his wrist. Not convinced? Then I'll beat you until you're convinced. Ignoring Lu Guang's hoarse screams, Dong swung his hand and flung him into the air. Boundless soul power swept forward, and one after another, huge stars formed and fell on Lu Guang's back. Rock rises with the wind, soaring 90,000 miles in the sky. Let's see how it flies. Boom, boom, boom. Deafening crashing sounds rose and fell like mountains. Every time a star fell, Lu Guang's body would sink by a lot. This first-rate genius of Nanjiang City thought of himself as extremely talented. Since the day he stepped into the Void Strike faction, he did not take anyone seriously. Lu Guang always thought that Dui Tianchong was not qualified to stand side by side with him. His future was to travel the 4 regions and compete with the descendants of the overlords. But who would have thought that he would be crushed by a Taoist disciple today? Anger, unwillingness, and struggle. Lu Guang was struggling hysterically. The Golden Rock spared no effort in unleashing his soul power in an attempt to break through the layers of starlight. However, every time a starlight smashed onto him, the radiance on his body would weaken by a bit. In the end, the golden rock's body faded away. He was crushed to death on the ground. Huge star stones accumulated on Lu Guang's body. This once-in-a-century genius of the Void Strike faction had been crushed to death. I admit defeat. Dui Tianchong felt like he was suffocating. His legs trembled violently as he looked at Lu Guang's body with fear. He spat out words that would bring shame to the Tai Sui Mountain. Sherdong acted as if he did not hear him. He walked towards Lu Guang step by step, getting closer and closer. I said that I would treat you well, so I must do as I said. How you killed my master, I will return 100 times over. No, Sherdong, calm down. You killed Lu Guang, but the Void Strike faction will not let this go. You will definitely push the Dao sect into a difficult situation. The Tai Sui Mountain can help the Dao sect. Moreover, the Imperial Coffin is right here. Don't you want Emperor Yuan's inheritance? It belongs to you now. Dui Tianchong got up in a panic. Like a slave, he pushed the Imperial Coffin with both hands and pushed it in front of Sherdong. Sherdong glanced at the Imperial Coffin and sneered disdainfully. His gaze fell back on Dui Tianchong's face. Emperor Yuan's inheritance? Can it be compared to my master's life? No, Sherdong, calm down. Dui Tianchong retreated in embarrassment. Chapter 1671. Which was more precious, the inheritance of the Emperor Realm or Li Chuji's life? The inheritance, of course. There were countless Saint Realm warriors in the south, and how many emperors were there? How could the two be compared? However, Sherdong's murderous eyes clearly told Dui Tianchong that his master was more precious in his heart. He was unique and irreplaceable. In an instant, a chill went straight to his soul. Dui Tianchong was so scared that he stepped back repeatedly. He was really scared. Sherdong regarded the inheritance of the Emperor Realm as dirt and wanted to take his life. However, he couldn't beat him. The little Tai Sui of Tai Sui Mountain had never been threatened like this. Evil creature, how dare you? An angry roar came. A wisp of Tai Sui emperors will descended. Seeing his son in a life-or-death situation, he immediately abandoned the headless corpse emperor. The golden luster on the clay man's body flowed and turned into a light shadow to kill Sherdong on the spot. Lu Guang is my disciple. As soon as Tai Sui Emperor moved, Elder Wu also moved. His eyes were wide open and his heart was pierced by needles. The sacred sword in his hand stirred up a glaring Emperor Realm flame. He slashed across the air to make Sherdong pay with his life. How could Chongqing let Elder Wu do as he wished? The lives of all the Taoist disciples were not as important as Sherdong. She had to protect him even if she had to risk her own life. Her slender palm condensed a Taoist seal and a huge 8 trigrams emblem slapped out. It glowed with a dazzling Emperor Realm light and blocked the sword chi. With a scream, both sides were annihilated. However, the experts of the 3 sects were not the only ones inside the Emperor's cave. There was also an even more dangerous Headless Corpse Emperor. As if on purpose, the Headless Corpse Emperor's hand surged with death chi, and the crescent moon long saber flew out at an unimaginably fast speed. Along with the swinging of heavy iron chains, the iron chains swept out like tentacles, binding the Tai Sui Emperor's body and preventing him from breaking free. At this moment, the crescent moon long saber pierced through the clay figurine's back and came out from its chest. Bang! There was an explosion. As dust filled the air, the blade directly wiped out the clay man. On Tai Sui Mountain thousands of miles away, Tai Sui Emperor's face suddenly turned pale. Sweat rolled down his body, and his Emperor Realm aura dropped sharply. He raised his head and let out a fierce roar. Elder Song, save me. Elder Song. Dui Tianchong saw Sherdong closing in on him. Behind him was the stone wall of the Emperor's cave. He had nowhere else to run. At this moment, the last elder of Tai Sui Mountain, Elder Song, was trembling violently. He looked at the Headless Corpse Emperor with fear in his eyes. He was so scared that he didn't know what to do. It was not that he didn't want to save the Headless Corpse Emperor, but he didn't dare to. Sure Dong, wait. Dui Tianchong kept begging for mercy. He looked like he was about to kneel on the ground. Sure Dong turned a deaf ear to him and forced him into a dead end. His deathly pale eyes emitted a murderous intent as he raised his palm. Rays of starlight flowed, and with a whoosh he slapped towards Dui Tianchang's face. Ah! Dui Tianchang screamed as he hugged his head and squatted down, forgetting all about his Tai Sui's stellar energy and dignity. Boom! Suddenly, as Sure Dong attacked, a giant coffin lid flew out from behind him. Inside the emperor coffin, a terrifying energy burst out, shattering the coffin lid into pieces. Boundless corpse chi billowed out like a cloud of gray dust, engulfing Sure Dong's body. This sudden change stunned everyone on the spot. Everyone saw that amidst the huge corpse aura, there was a mass of platinum gas flickering with sacred radiance. It let out a ghostly cry as it drilled into the head of a humanoid figure. Emperor-level inheritance. Fuqing sat up and said in shock. There was no excitement on his face because Sure Dong's hoarse howls of extreme pain could be heard from the majestic corpse aura. Under normal circumstances, martial artists would naturally feel pain when receiving the inheritance of a mighty figure. But it shouldn't be like this. It was as if Sure Dong's soul was being forcibly torn apart. This was possession. Crack! Fuqing's heart seemed to have been frozen. It fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. Emperor Yuan, who was buried in the graveyard, actually didn't die completely. Today, this monster wanted to borrow his body to be reborn. At this moment, Fu Cheng thought of many things. It was no wonder that emperor-level powerhouses and high-level Yuan venerates couldn't step into the graveyard. It was because those people's consciousness power was very strong and it wasn't easy to possess them. After this old monster died, his power was weakened by the heavenly Tao, and he didn't have enough confidence in possessing a human sovereign. As for why he only made his move now and why he wanted to possess Sure Dong, it was most likely because he had taken a fancy to Sure Dong's bloodline talent. It's over. Fuqing knew very well that Sure Dong had no ability to compete with an emperor-level powerhouse. The two sides weren't on the same level at all. Even if the three sect masters of the Dao sects came in person, they probably wouldn't be able to stop him. Sure Dong's bloodline returned to its ancestral state, and he crushed Lu Guang. The son of Emperor Tai Sui could only beg for mercy. The Dao sects had been in decline for so long and had finally seen the momentum to rise again, but this hope turned into nothing at this time. Today, the three sects were here. Not only were they fooled by a dead monster, but the Dao sects had also lost a genius for nothing. Old man, how dare you? Fu Cheng spat out the furious roar of the Dao sect's sect master. He no longer cared about Elder Wu, who was holding the sacred sword, and rushed into the corpse aura with all his might. However, a figure was faster than him. Boom! A pile of stones exploded in all directions. Qin Hao, whose face was covered in blood, had an extremely excited expression. He stepped on the water wind and turned into an afterimage as he rushed into the corpse aura. He had long guessed that Emperor Yuan, who was buried in the cemetery, wasn't completely dead. The other party wanted to possess his body and be reborn. Qin Hao was also waiting for this moment. After all, it would be a waste if he didn't take the nomological power that was given to him for free. The Emperor's intent nomological power that could control corpses seemed to be quite fun. Inside the majestic gray corpse aura, Sure Dong's expression was incomparably hideous. His hands grabbed his hair crazily, and his eyes were bloodshot. The blood vessels crawled crazily like worms. The moment he was swept in, something incomparably terrifying drilled into his head, wanting to devour his soul and replace him. Sure Dong naturally resisted with all his might, but this power was too strong. In front of this power, Sure Dong's soul was like looking up at a mountain, insignificant. In just a short breath, he felt that his soul was about to be torn clean. His consciousness instantly blurred. Just when he felt that he was about to disappear from the world, in his despair, a familiar face entered his soul. It was so familiar. Am I dead? Sure Dong murmured. He actually saw Qin Hao's face. He was probably really dead, so his master came to pick him up. Die for me. Qin Hao wasn't as dramatic as Sherdong. The second after he rushed in, the power of an Emperor Realm expert in his palm rolled down and pressed on Eastern Sky's soul. At the same time, the majestic Emperor's intent was absorbed, and Qin Hao's Emperor's body directly appeared in Sherdong's soul. Here, Qin Hao saw a bald old man. Similarly, the Emperor's intent surged around him, suffused with an astonishing amount of death aura, forcing Sherdong's soul to the verge of collapse. Too lazy to greet him, Qin Hao's red lotus tyrannical fire merged with the Emperor's intent. He stretched out his hand and grabbed the old man's bald head. The old man struggled desperately. With a bang, his remnant soul was extinguished under Qin Hao's palm. "Silly child, wake up." A familiar voice sounded in his ears. It was his master's voice. When his master's voice sounded, the tearing sensation in Sherdong's soul disappeared instantly. He slowly opened his eyes, which were still white. "Moss, Master, are you going to pick me up?" "Yes, it's over. We should return to Dao Mountain to plant the herbs." Qin Hao smiled and patted Sherdong's head. This trip was not in vain. Chapter 1672. When Qin Hao killed the corpse Emperor's remnant soul, he didn't erase its Dao will. During this trip, not only did Sherdong awaken his innate bloodline, but he also obtained an Emperor Dao law. Now that the Dao will had perfectly fused with him, he could be considered to have successfully accepted the inheritance. He only needed to slowly control this power in the future. The space returned to calm. After Qin Hao erased the corpse Emperor's remnant soul, the headless corpse Emperor lost its source of power and turned into ashes. The rotten smell and death aura that filled the Emperor's cave instantly disappeared, and the air was unprecedentedly fresh. At this moment, everyone looked at Sherdong, not understanding what had happened. Sect Master Ji Biechio, who used the soul transfer technique, also looked at the two in a daze. A moment ago, Sherdong was wailing like a ghost, as if his soul was being possessed, but in the blink of an eye, he was so calm. Did he refine the inheritance? Also, why didn't Li Chuji die? Everyone, my disciple, is blessed by great fortune and has received the protection of his ancestors. He has successfully accepted the Emperor Realm inheritance, which is really worthy of celebration. Now that there is nothing worth staying here for, why don't we all go home in peace? Qin Hao said casually, reassuring Ji Biechio. Sure enough, Sherdong had fused with the inheritance. "Master, are you okay?" Only now did Sherdong realize that something was wrong. Then, a sense of weakness spread throughout his body, as if his body was suddenly hollowed out. The flickering starlight on the surface of his body dissipated, and he fell straight down. "You are fine. How can something happen to your master first?" Qin Hao supported Sherdong. Once his bloodline awakened, he fought without restraint and overused his soul power. It was a normal reaction, and he would be fine after resting for a while. "Chu-san, what's going on?" It was Ji Biechio's voice. Before Qin Hao had time to explain, a series of hurried footsteps came from afar. Soon, they saw that the people of the three sects who stayed outside had arrived. Shi Jinhua ran the fastest, leaving the group and rushing over like an arrow. But immediately, he was shocked by the scene inside the Emperor's cave. In order to compete for the inheritance, the disciples of the three sects had fought fiercely, and both sides had lost a lot of people. Corpses were everywhere. The most eye-catching thing was the corpse of Lu Guang from the Airstrike sect. Layers upon layers of huge starstones pressed down on Lu Guang's body like a towering iron tower. His body was almost crushed out of shape. It was too horrible to look at. However, Lu Guang's head was well preserved. This man was too outstanding. It was hard for him not to be recognized. Other than that, Dui Tianchong had also fallen to the ground. He wasn't injured, but he had overexerted himself. Coupled with the fact that he had been driven mad by Sherdong, he was truly frightened out of his wits. Lin Chong of the air-striking sect, Tian Biao of the Taisui Mountain, and many other well-known, outstanding figures had died. Naturally, there were also Taoism's casualties. Shi Lang fainted. Bo Minghua intercepted Tian Biao and was severely injured. In the martial pavilion, a disciple whose cultivation was second only to Bo Minghua had also unfortunately died. The injuries of the other disciples were not light. Generally speaking, Taoism did not suffer any losses. After all, they had the advantage of numbers. Moreover, none of the elite representatives of the various dojos had died. Even so, Shi Jinhua's heart still clenched tightly. It was not that he felt sorry for his disciple, but the situation before him told him that Taoism and the two sects had become enemies. Li Chuji, how dare you? Who gave you the right to make the disciples fight with the two sects? Can you bear the responsibility? Shi Jinhua saw Qin Hao at a glance. He strode forward and scolded him. When he passed by Shi Qing's side, he was slapped to the ground mercilessly by the other party. This is none of your business. Shut up. Shi Qing spoke in the voice of a middle-aged man. Sect Master. Shi Jinhua covered his face and looked up at Shi Qing. Naturally, he recognized the aura of the sect master. This was the soul transfer technique. Ah, well done, Taoism did well. Our two sects sent out all their elites and became the icing on the cake for Taoism. We became your protectors. The inheritance was taken away by Taoism. Our two sects' elders and disciples were killed or injured. Especially, Elder Wu's gaze fell on Lu Guang's corpse. He choked and could not say the name of his beloved disciple, no matter how hard he tried. At this moment, he suddenly raised the holy sword in his hand and pointed it at Yubiechio. Emperor Bai, shouldn't you give us a reasonable explanation? Yes, and our Taisui Mountain also lost 2 elders. The Taisui Emperor was also injured because of this. In the end, you took all the benefits. Elder Song roared with righteous indignation. He helped Dui Tian up. Without the threat of the headless corpse emperor, he dared to come and protect the young master. Explanation? Yubiechio looked at the people of the 2 sections. What explanation? Of course, the inheritance. Hand over the disciple of Taoism. Elder Wu took a step forward. The holy sword in his hand spewed out a blazing imperial light. He pointed it at Shi Dong, as if he was striking the will of the emperor. You want me to hand over the disciple? Yubiechio's eyes suddenly turned cold. He took control of Shi Qing's body and unleashed a powerful imperial aura. He pressed down with his palm in the air. That depends on your ability to strike the emperor. It was just a wisp of imperial aura attached to the blade. The technique of striking the emperor was far inferior to the martial arts passed down by the ancestors of Taoism. Yubiechio was not afraid of sword. Even if he could not unleash the true power of the Renwang, Yubiechio was still not someone Elder Wu, who was holding a holy sword, could contend with. His palm pressed down and exerted the limit of Shi Qing's body to the maximum. The 8 trigrams palm radiance with the imperial aura swallowed Elder Wu whole. Elder Wu roared angrily. He held the sword with both hands and raised it above his head. The blade of the sword burst out a dazzling imperial aura. It soared into the sky and barely pierced through the 8 trigrams palm radiance. But that was all. After a series of fierce battles with the headless corpse emperor, there was little left of the imperial power stored in the holy sword. Almost as soon as it broke through the imperial aura of Yubiechio, the holy sword lost its luster. Elder Wu's body was hit. He spat out a mouthful of blood and was thrown out. Seeing this, Qin Hao rolled up one of his sleeves. A stream of saint power rolled up the ownerless thick sword on the ground. Puff! The moment Elder Wu fell, the blade pierced through his chest and nailed him to the stone wall. Taoism will pay the price. Elder Wu grabbed the hilt of the sword painfully. He wanted to pull it out and cursed viciously. Seeing this, Yubiechio directly killed him with the Emperor's palm radiance and destroyed his spirit. Price? Come on then. Taoism had been suppressed by the 2 sects until now. He had had enough. At this moment, the disciples of Taoism scattered and completely blocked the 9 exits of the Emperor's cave. They stared at the disciples of the 2 sects with murderous eyes. Master, Qin Hao carried the unconscious Shi Dong and came to Yu Biechio's side. At this moment, the imperial aura on Shi Qing's body gradually dissipated. Obviously, she had reached her limit. Third day, take the disciples back to the sect and prepare for war. After that, Yu Biechio's aura completely disappeared. Shi Qing was so tired that she collapsed to the ground. Bosameo helped her up. Qin Hao glanced at the field and finally fixed his gaze on Elder Song. He issued a warning that sounded like a threat. I hope that Tai Sui Mountain won't be impulsive and get involved in this dispute. If that happens, there won't be 3 sects in Nanjiang City anymore. Chapter 1673. After the corpse emperor's remnant soul was erased, the power of rules that shrouded the cemetery disappeared. The fog dispersed, revealing the collapsed mine. The 3 sects returned to their respective sects. It was a peaceful journey, and they didn't encounter any more dead spirits. Following the sect master's orders, Qin Hao and Bo Sameo didn't attack the people from Tai Sui Mountain, nor did they kill the remaining disciples of the void-striking sect. The disciples were following the orders of the elders, so they had no choice. If the 2 sects were to fight, the key to victory would be the sect master and the void-striking Tao Emperor. Killing some of the other party's disciples wouldn't affect the overall situation. Instead, it would make Taoism seem too vicious. As for Tai Sui Mountain, fighting for the inheritance was one thing. A sect war was another drastic change. The former depended on one's own abilities, so injuries were inevitable. As for the latter, Taoism and Tai Sui Mountain hadn't reached that stage yet. If they were to break off relations with Tai Sui Mountain now, they would be in a disadvantageous position. Sect Master Zhang Biechio's judgment was correct. When Elder Wu asked Taoism to hand over Sherdong, there was no room for negotiation. He was very decisive, so it was impossible for Taoism to hand over Sherdong. Tai Sui Mountain was different. Of course, if Tai Sui Emperor insisted on getting involved and colluded with the void-striking Tao Emperor, the 3 emperors of Taoism wouldn't be afraid either. So be it. In this trip to the cemetery, the 3 sects suffered losses. The Voidstrike faction suffered the worst fate. First, an elder died in the graveyard. Then, Elder Wu was killed by Tao sect. Then, the personal disciple of the Voidstrike Tao Emperor, Lin Chong, died. A group of elite disciples suffered heavy casualties. Lu Guang was the most worried. Putting aside the inheritance, Lu Guang's death in Sherdong's hands was the main reason why the 2 sects were at odds with each other. Even if the void-striking sect obtained the inheritance today, they would still seek revenge for Lu Guang's death and attack Taoism. As for Tai Sui Mountain, they lost an elder. The rest of the disciples weren't in a good situation either. Most importantly, Dui Tian was frightened by Sherdong. He was afraid that this would leave a shadow in his heart and affect his future cultivation. However, compared to Lu Guang's ending, Dui Tian was thanks to his ancestors. As for Taoism, Shilang, Swan Ni, and Bo Minghua suffered heavy injuries. An elite disciple of the martial pavilion died. The rest of the disciples suffered varying injuries. Because of Qin Hao's secret protection, the team almost didn't suffer any losses before entering the Emperor's cave. Relying on their advantage in numbers, the Taoist disciples didn't suffer any losses when fighting with the 2 sections. On the contrary, they dealt a heavy blow to the arrogance of the 2 sections. Sherdong had benefited the most. Not only had his bloodline returned to its ancestral state, but he had also successfully fused with the corpse emperor's inheritance. It could be said that all the preparations the 3 sects had made in the graveyard had benefited Sherdong alone. Sherdong's personal fortune naturally belonged to the Tao sect. This time, the Tao sect was the biggest winner. Of course, this was merely the beginning. There would definitely be a battle between the Voidstrike faction and the Taoist sect. The loser was destined to become the dust of an era. Tao sect, main peak. The main peak was lofty and tall, like an undying pine tree that stood towering amidst the rolling mountain range. Even though it had existed for a long time, it still retained its youth. Today, as far as the eye could see, the main peak was densely packed with disciples. On the day the team returned from the graveyard, The three sect leaders issued a strict order for the entire sect to actively prepare for the battle with the Void Strike faction. The Martial Pavilion, Sword Valley, Spirit Pagoda, Weapons Workshop, and so on were all abandoned. All the disciples gathered at the main peak, including the herb garden that Qin Hao was in charge of. All the herbs were uprooted, and no one was left in the outer sect. It could be seen that Jean Biechio attached great importance to this battle. He was very clear about the power of the Void Strike faction. At this moment, a great protective formation of the sect that was suffused with bright imperial might rose from the main peak out of thin air. It soared to a height of thousands of feet. Its radiance was folded and exuded an extremely majestic power. Among the three sovereigns of the Dao sect, sect leader Jean Biechio was the leader of the Ji clan. He had the highest cultivation at the third layer of the Renwang realm. Usually, he didn't concern himself with the affairs of the sect. He only took charge of the overall situation during critical moments. Vice-sect leader Shi Yongyan was the leader of the Shi clan. He had the cultivation of the second layer of the Renwang realm and was in charge of external attacks. Vice-sect leader Bo Shang was the leader of the Bo clan. He had the cultivation of the second layer of the Renwang realm and was the only formation emperor in the Nanjiang area. He was in charge of the sect's defense. Now, this newly upgraded great protective formation of the sect was personally arranged by Bo Shang. The three sect leaders rarely showed their faces. They only personally took action when the situation was tense. Under normal circumstances, all the external and internal affairs of the sect were handled by Elder Qi, Elder Yu, and the others. Shi Jinhua, Shi Qing, Bo Sameo, and the others were in charge of carrying out the orders of the inner sect. The various positions of the Taoist sect were closely related. It's finally done. Vice-sect leader Bo Shang, a mellow middle-aged man, clapped his hands and looked up at the great protective formation that rose above his head. A smile appeared on his face as if he was admiring a masterpiece. Around him, there was a dense crowd of disciples. All of them had respectful expressions. This new great protective formation of the sect gave the disciples a great sense of security. What are you so proud of? According to the ancient records of the Taoist sect, I know that the great ancestor can easily draw a formation that can swallow the power of yin and yang between heaven and earth and form a formation with the great path. Even imperial masters can hardly move it. Your broken formation is probably not enough to fill the gaps between the teeth of the Empyrean Dao Emperor. Beside Bo Shang stood a middle-aged man with an otherworldly temperament. His eyes were as sharp as swords and contained a terrifying will of the sword. He was the other vice-sect leader of the Taoist sect, the leader of the Shi clan, Shi Yongyan. Bo Shang's face darkened slightly. He glanced at the disciples and saw a trace of fear on their faces. He scolded loudly, "Don't listen to vice-sect leader Shi's nonsense. If the Empyrean Dao Emperor can't break my formation, you can only cry outside the formation like a shrew." Ha ha ha! Whether it was true or not, the disciples were amused. "It's fine if you don't give me face, but why do you have to mess with our morale?" Bo Shang came over and glared fiercely at Shi Yongyan. Bo Shang knew that was a Dao ancestor. How could he compare himself to a Dao ancestor? Why couldn't Shi Yongyan compare himself to Patriarch Shi Mu of the Shi clan? Shi Yongyan smiled hypocritically and shrugged. He just didn't want the disciples to rely too much on this formation. It was indeed impossible to stop the Empyrean Dao Emperor with just one formation. Vice-sect leader Bo Shang's formation is extraordinary. However, from what I see, the power of this formation actually has a lot of room for improvement. At this time, a voice came from the side. Bo Shang looked over. "Li Chuji." "Look, even a third-year junior can tell," Shi Yongyan said. Li Chuji's cultivation was the weakest among all the elders of the Taoist sect. This was a slap in the face. "Ahem, third-year junior. You know about formations?" Bo Shang asked. "A little." Qin Hao smiled and pointed to the sky. "I've seen this formation. Uncles and Li Chuji, the sect leader, has summoned us. We are waiting in the hall." At this time, Shi Jinhua's voice came from the direction of the hall. The three of them looked at each other. Shi Yongyan said, "Let's go." As he spoke, he took a step forward. His body flew in the air, leaving behind a sharp shadow of Renhuang. "He's so powerful." The disciples looked at him and said, "This was the Sword Emperor of the Taoist sect." Even if the Empyrean Tao Emperor really broke the formation of Vice Sect leader Bo Shang, he might not be able to win. Moreover, sect leader Bo Shang was stronger. The three emperors of the Taoist sect were the absolute support of the disciples. But they didn't know whether Vice Sect leader Shi's sword was stronger or the Tribulation Sword Emperor who occupied the South Sky peak was stronger. The warriors of the South River said that the Tribulation Sword Emperor was stronger than all the Renhuang of the three sections. The disciples of the Taoist sect didn't dare to make wild guesses. So far, no one had seen the Tribulation Sword Emperor in action. After all, Bo Shang and the other two were trapped in the sword chi of the South Sky Peak, and the Empyrean Tao Emperor and Tai Sui Emperor joined forces. All of this happened in secret. Only the high-level elders of the three sects knew. In the disciples' hearts, the leaders of the three sects were still the strongest. Chapter 1674. When they arrived at the main hall of the main peak, Gate Master Giobiecchio, Elder Yu, Elder Qi, and Bosameo were all present. All the elders and deacons were gathered together in a solemn atmosphere. Shi Dong, Baiyan, Shi Lang, and Bo Minghua were also present. Baiyan and the other two were still injured. Shi Dong had exhausted too much of his soul power and had just woken up. Elder Yu personally checked his condition and found that there was nothing wrong with his martial body. After the battle with Lu Guang and Dui Tianzhong, Shi Dong's cultivation had increased, reaching the 5th level of the profound sage realm. At the top of the hall, there were incense sticks and memorial tablets for the ancestors of the three clans. Among them, there were 3 names that stood out and were placed at the top. Qin Hao looked up and saw that they were Bo Changji, Bai Dong, and Shi Mu. These 3 were the proud geniuses of the Taoist Gate who had swept through an era. They symbolized the supreme martial path of the Taoist Gate. At this moment, Giobiecchio slowly stood up from the main seat. His green Chilean Taoist robe made his upright face look even more majestic. Pay respects to the ancestors of the Taoist Gate. Giobiecchio's robe slightly lifted as he faced the memorial tablets and knelt down solemnly. The elders and disciples followed suit as if they were on a pilgrimage. Qin Hao looked at them calmly, but there was a trace of bitterness in his heart. However, he didn't kneel down with the others. Eastern Sky and Shi Mu were his senior brothers. He could only kneel down to Elder Tian Quan and the Six Peak Masters. In terms of identity, he had entered the Taoist Gate under the alias of Li Chuji. He wasn't a member of the 3 clans, so he wasn't qualified to kneel. Everyone in the hall didn't feel that it was inappropriate. It was very normal. After lighting a wisp of green smoke, Gate Master Giobiecchio took the lead to insert the incense sticks into the incense burner. His gaze fell on Shi Dong as he said, "Shi Dong of the Shi clan has returned to the clan to pay respects to ancestor Shi Mu." When the long-awaited voice rang out, Shi Dong's kneeling body suddenly trembled. Tears flowed out of his eyes as he kowtowed heavily. Elder Qi handed the incense sticks to Shi Dong and sighed. "Child, light the incense for the ancestor." Shi Dong choked with sobs as he held the jaw stick in his hand and slowly walked forward. For 8 years, ever since his parents passed away, he came to Taoism alone. Now, he was already 23 years old. Finally, he could openly worship his ancestors and gain the recognition of the Shi clan. Thinking back to 8 years ago when he knelt at the foot of the mountain of Taoism and was ridiculed, Shi Dong felt that it was all worth it. Unfilial descendant Shi Dong has come to acknowledge his ancestors. Shi Dong's hands trembled as he inserted the jaw stick directly below Shi Mu's memorial tablet. "Father, Mother, do you see this? Rest in peace." Only the sound of tears falling to the ground could be heard in the silent hall. At this moment, everyone, from the 3 leaders to the elders and deacons, were moved. They had all witnessed how Shi Dong was rejected by Taoism. Who would have thought that Shi Mu's blood flowed in this child's veins? Soul power of the great path galaxy, bloodline atavism. Who would dare to say that Shi Dongfei was a descendant of a Shi clan? Many people were so ashamed that they did not dare to raise their heads, especially the Shi clan leader, Shi Yongnian, and Elder Qi, Shi Qi. These two were the pillars of the Shi clan and the most senior elders. Child, I apologize on behalf of the Shi clan. I hope you can forgive me. Shi Yongnian stepped forward and bowed to Shi Dong. He was a Renhuang cultivator. This bow was deserved, and Shi Dong deserved it. At the same time, Elder Qi and many members of the Shi clan, including Shi Jinhua, all apologized to Shi Dong. At this moment, Shi Jinhua's feelings were extremely complicated. He was both regretful and scared. When he first banned Shi Dong from entering Taoism, he was the one who led the way. However, he did that to protect the dignity of the Shi clan. There was no evidence, and there was no connection in the genealogy. He could not figure out why the direct descendants of Grandmaster Shi Mu were left out of the Taoist sect. But it was too late to say anything now. Shi Jinhua was very scared. Clan leader, elders, you don't have to do this. It is already my greatest happiness to be able to return and acknowledge my ancestors. Shi Dong helped Shi Yongnian up. It was inappropriate for him to accept the clan leader's bow. After Elder Qi and the others heard this, they felt even more ashamed. They turned to stare at Shi Jinhua and asked, "Does your face hurt?" Facing Elder Qi's devouring gaze, Shi Jinhua shrank back and lowered his head. He was so scared that he did not dare to make a sound. At this time, Shi Yongnian's eyes fell on Qin Hao. He also bowed sincerely. Before Qin Hao could speak, he slowly straightened his body and said, "The Shi clan thanks you, Li Chuji, for this bow. If you did not take care of Adong, you would not have had the chance to enter Taoism, let alone awaken the bloodline power of Shi Mu. Don't worry, Taoism will not treat you badly." Deputy Clan Leader Shi, you are too serious. This child is destined to be with me. When I see him, I can't help but admire him. I really can't help it. Qin Hao chuckled, looking very frivolous. However, the people of Taoism were used to it. It's the 3rd year of the Lunar New Year. You've helped Shi Dong a lot, but you've also spoiled a lot of herbs in the past few years. I know you planted them yourself, but since you planted them in the herb garden, they're Taoist herbs. Qin Hao looked at Zhang Bieqiu. Zhang Bieqiu waved his hand. Why should I reason with you? Unless I'm crazy, the merit will offset the fault. In the future, you will continue to guard the herb garden. Elder Yu is old, so don't bother him with trivial matters all day long. As for the herb garden, you will have full authority in the future. Bo Sameo's eyes brightened. The clan leader's meaning was obvious. Junior 3 became Elder Yu's substitute alchemist. When Elder Yu was not around, he would immediately promote Li Chuji to become an elder of the inner sect. This was a promotion. Amazing. Bo Sameo gave him a thumbs up as if to say, "I think highly of you." Next to him, Shi Jinhua's eyes were filled with jealousy. He had not become Elder Qi's substitute yet, but Li Chuji had climbed up the ranks quickly. In this regard, Qin Hao's expression was calm. An elder of the inner sect? Perhaps he could not wait until that day. In addition, I have a few things to announce. Lu Guang and Lin Chang died at the hands of Shi Dong. The Kong striking faction will not let this matter go. Everyone knows very well that the goal of the Kong striking Tao Emperor is the inheritance. Lu Guang's death is just an excuse. Big brother. Shi Yongnian had something to say. Zhang Bieqiu waved his hand, motioning for him not to be interrupted. He continued, "I know what you are thinking. The old monster of the Kong striking Tao Mountain is still there. I estimate that his cultivation is at least at the 6th level of the Renhuang realm, or even higher. However, no matter what, Taoism will never hand over Adong. Even if Taoism has to fight to the last person, Adong must live. Protect the bloodline of ancestor Shi Mu. Why should we be afraid of a battle?" In the main hall, everyone's blood boiled as they shouted. In the past, the 3 geniuses of Taoism were all unparalleled. Now, Shi Dong's bloodline had awakened the power of ancestor Shi Mu's Great Path Galaxy. His future was limitless, and it was very likely that he would become the second ancestor. Shi Dong's safety was related to the future of Taoism. If he did not die prematurely, Taoism would return to its peak. Emperor Yuan's inheritance? In Zhang Bieqiu's eyes, the emperor's power that controlled the dead spirits could not be compared to ancestor Shermu's bloodline at all. However, the inheritance had already merged with Sherdong. Once the inheritance was given away, Sherdong's life and death would be unpredictable. Taoism would never hand over this person. Listening to the excited shouts in the main hall, Sherdong quietly clenched his fists. For the first time, he felt the warmth of being surrounded by his family. Shi Jinhua secretly glanced at Sherdong, his eyes flickering. For one person, they would rather sacrifice the entire Taoism. Did Zhang Bieqiu mean that Shi Jinhua would be sacrificed as well? Chapter 1675. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Here it comes. Sherdong was human, but wasn't Shi Jinhua? As a descendant of the Shi clan, even if Sherdong's bloodline was atavistic and his talent far surpassed Shi Jinhua's, it was too cruel to sacrifice thousands of lives for one person. This was not fair. My life is in my own hands, not in the hands of the heavens. Clenching his fists, Shi Jinhua secretly made a decision. No one paid attention to Shi Jinhua. Since the orthodoxy had been passed down to this day, the blood of the three clans was thicker than water, and their hearts were firmer than gold. Since Zhou Bieqiu had made a decision, the only thing everyone could do was to support the current sect master. There's another thing. Zhou Bieqiu turned to face Qin Hao and said in a gentler tone, "Third day, you've been looking after the herb garden for 8 years. We all know how tired you are. However, Sherdong is not suitable to continue cultivating with you. For his future, I've decided to take him as my personal disciple." Zhou Bieqiu was a Runhuang powerhouse and the sect master of Taoism. In terms of cultivation and status, Qin Hao, who was guarding the herb garden, could not compare to him at all. Sherdong's bloodline was atavistic, and it was most suitable for him to be Zhou Bieqiu's disciple. No one in the hall had any objections. Under the guidance of a Renhuang, Sherdong's cultivation would be faster, and the martial arts he learned would be stronger. More importantly, his status as the sect master's personal disciple was 1,000 times better than being an alchemist's apprentice in the herb garden. In fact, everyone knew that from this moment on, Zhou Bieqiu intended to train Sherdong as the next sect master's successor. Naturally, no one had any objections. Of course, Qin Hao also had no objections. In fact, Sherdong and Zhou Bieqiu were very suitable because they both belonged to Taoism. In contrast, Qin Hao's martial arts were mixed. Although he did not lack powerful offensive techniques, whether it was fire spells, Jinghong sword style, or the power of rules, they were not suitable for Sherdong. Probably only Qin Hao's Way of the Falling Stars could be slightly related to the Great Path of the Milky Way. But in detail, both had their own specialties. The Way of the Falling Stars was about power, brute force, and the Great Path of the Milky Way was about illusions with thousands of changes, and it was inseparable from art. Art was the art passed down from the ancestors of the three Taoism. Even in the Divine Palace, the power of the Eastern Skies art was far stronger. I refuse. To everyone's surprise, Sherdong actually took the initiative to speak on behalf of Qin Hao. Sect Master, I have cultivated with my master for many years. My master is the one who understands and is the most familiar with my personal situation. He is the one who can give me the most correct guidance. I'm afraid it'll be hard for me to get used to it in a short period of time. During this crucial period, the airstrike sect could attack at any time, and I can't concentrate on my cultivation. Everyone let out a sigh of relief at the same time. He actually refused to become the sect leader's personal disciple. The other disciples would beg for it, but what Sherdong said was also reasonable. Bold and responsible. I like it. Tao Yu praised with a smile. Qin Hao shrugged helplessly. It was not that he was unwilling to hand over his disciple, but that his disciple refused to leave. All right, you're right. For the time being, I'll let Li Chuji guide you in your cultivation. If there's anything you don't understand, you can come to me or your two uncles at any time. Zhang Bieqiu didn't insist. After that, All of them returned to their residences and did their best to improve their strengths so that they could resist the Tao Emperor Jin Kong's attacks. Big brother, this battle won't be easy to deal with. After everyone left, Bo Shang let out a long sigh. His eyes were filled with intense worry. The airstrike sect dominated the 6 counties of Nanjiang and had a strong foundation. They had many small sects under their command, from the Ren Huang to the elders and deacons. The quality of their sect was better than that of the Dao sect. Once the battle started, the Dao sect would be under great pressure. I just hope that old fart ancestor Jin Kong won't invite that person back. Sect leader Zhang Bieqiu looked out of the hall and let out a long sigh. If that person from the airstrike sect didn't return, the Dao sect would still have the strength to resist, even though the odds of winning were not great. Once ancestor Jin Kong invited that person back, there would be no more suspense in this battle. The Dao Mountain would definitely be destroyed. Even so, Zhang Bieqiu's determination to protect Sherdong would not waver. This was because the main peak of the Dao Mountain had a formation that had been sealed for 1,000 years. That formation could ensure Sherdong's safety. After leaving the main hall, Qin Hao brought Sherdong to the side yard. The main peak was extremely huge and could accommodate the inner and outer disciples. Each elder also had a side yard. Why didn't you agree to the sect leader's request? Qin Hao asked as they walked. Sherdong followed obediently and kept silent. A young eagle will eventually leave its parents' wings and face the sky that belongs to it. It's only a matter of time. Qin Hao sighed. He knew that in Sherdong's heart, he was not just a master. This could be seen from Dui Tianchang's palm strike. However, Qin Hao's trip to the Dao sect this time was to fulfill the obsession of his eldest senior brother, the Eastern Sky. He also did it on behalf of his senior sister. He had to leave sooner or later. Qin Hao's 8-year mission to nurture Sherdong into a talent capable of shouldering the heavy responsibility of the Dao sect was basically completed. He had his own matters to attend to. If it wasn't for Emperor Jin Kong's crusade against the Dao sect, perhaps Qin Hao would have left yesterday. He would have disappeared silently and tried not to disturb anyone. Now, even if he left, he had to personally witness the end of the battle between the Dao sect and the airstrike sect. Otherwise, he wouldn't be at ease. For half a month, the Dao sect was actively busy. Everyone was united as they prepared for the battle with all their might. There were no less than 10 formations on the main peak. The weapons workshop equipped the disciples with the best weapons and even took out their treasure chests. Regardless of whether it was the elders or the disciples, they were fully immersed in their cultivation. The atmosphere was extremely tense. Everyone was very clear that on the surface, this battle was about Sherdong's inheritance. In reality, it was about the survival of the 2 sections. If the Dao sect was defeated, it would disappear forever. No disciple was willing to see the Dao sect disappear. After living in the sect for more than 10 years, they had feelings in their hearts. The Dao sect was in full swing. Strangely, the airstrike sect was very peaceful in the past half a month. They didn't even send anyone to investigate the Dao sect situation. It was as if nothing had happened between the 2 sides. It was too unusual. This made Chu Bieqiu even more uneasy. Emperor Jin Kong's temper shouldn't be like this. He couldn't guess or see through it. The 3 emperors of the Dao sect could only make use of their time to improve their cultivation. No matter what the airstrike Dao emperor did, the Dao sect had to accept it. Since that was the case, Chu Bieqiu would rather this battle come later. It was best if it didn't come at all. Unfortunately, Chu Bieqiu's expectations were destined to be disappointed. What should come came. On this day, in the 6 counties west of Nanjiang City, in the direction of the airstrike Dao Mountain, a vast army of cultivators traveled through the air. It was like an endless dark cloud. Everywhere they passed, the ground turned into shadows as they headed straight for the Dao Mountain. At the front of the army, 2 dazzling figures of Ren Huang sat on the chariot. The airstrike ancestor and the airstrike Dao emperor were actually leading the army. At the same time, in the direction of the Taisui Mountain, there was also a formation of cultivators slowly advancing through the air. Compared to the vast airstrike sect, the scale of the Taisui Mountain was not large. However, no one dared to underestimate them because the Tai Emperor was in the army. These two armies, one from the east and the other from the west, quickly surrounded the Qilin Dao Mountain in the center of Nanjiang. Chapter 1676. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation 1 Pagoda Suppression. The hearts of the people in the South River trembled violently as they looked at the dark clouds above their heads. Their chests were suffocating. The human sovereign had arrived. Was it sect war? Pairs of eyes followed the dark clouds as they flew away, in the direction of Qilin Daoist Mountain. Today, between Taoism and the Void Strike sect, one side would be wiped out. It's here, on the main peak of Taoism. Sect Master Zhu Biechio sat on the ground as his body flickered with imperial qi. He opened his eyes slightly. Behind him, thousands of disciples from the Tao sect stood densely. As he said that, the disciples immediately became nervous and their palms were sweating. If they won this war, Taoism would survive. If they lost, Taoism would perish. The ancient Taoism mountain that had stood in the southern border of the East continent for thousands of years finally welcomed the final battle. Disciples in charge of the formation, listen up. Vice Sect Master Bo Shang raised his arm. For a moment, a bright light curtain rose from the ground as the protective peak formation was activated. The formation light radiated and shrouded the entire main peak. At this moment, square formations of disciples stepped out of the Taoism, each led by an elder. There weren't many of them. Each team had about 30 people on average, but they were all elite disciples of Taoism. The small teams were independent from each other as they emitted different formation powers. Tao Wu's team was filled with raging flames of the way. Shilang's team of the Sword Valley was shining with extremely sharp sword light. It was a sword formation. Bo Minghua led the elites of the Martial Pavilion. The entire team was covered by the Yin-Yang Dao light. They were about to charge for Taoism. Small formation lights flashed one after another as their fighting spirit seemed to ignite the blood in their hearts. Thousands of people in the Taoism hall moved in unison as their palms landed on their swords. From afar, they saw two armies of cultivators, one from the east and one from the west, slowly approaching from the sky. The crowd was like an ocean. Demon beasts roared and soared in the army formation. The two commanders in front of the two armies were surrounded by the dazzling light of the human sovereign. Finally, they stopped in the sky above the main peak of Taoism Mountain. They were like majestic heavenly court soldiers looking down at the Taoism disciples below. Senior Nierong, how have you been? Jobi Chio slowly got up and flew into the sky. Light flowed around his body. His eyes fell on a huge chariot of the Void Strike sect. My dear nephew, the actions of the Tao sect in the cemetery have truly disappointed the old man. Now, I'm forced to seek justice. On the chariot, an old man with yellow eyebrows wearing a royal robe replied coldly. Nierong, great ancestor Ji Kong, had a seniority that far surpassed that of the Ren Huang of the three sections. He was the oldest living monster, the undisputed number one Ren Huang in the Nanjiang region. Senior Nia, when it comes to fighting for the Emperor Realm inheritance, the three sects rely on their own abilities. The disciples of the Emptiness sect are inferior, while the disciples of the Taoist creed won fair and square. Why is it that when it comes out of your mouth, it's a completely different story? Shi Yongnian and Bo Shang stepped into the air and stood next to Ji Biechio. The three sovereigns of Taoism lived and died together. Cut the crap. Hand over the disciple you fused with your inheritance. The Emperor of the Void Strike sect, who was dressed in black, stepped down from the chariot. His thunderous voice seemed to penetrate the Tao sect's protective formation and blasted into the ears of the Taoist disciples. At this moment, the thousands of disciples and elders on the training ground felt their minds tremble. An imposing figure of a Ren Huang appeared in their souls, out of thin air, wanting everyone to kneel down and submit. Ji Biechio ignored the Emperor of the Void Strike sect. He turned his gaze and looked to the other side. A little further to the east, the Tai Sui Emperor led the elders of the Tai Sui Mountain. They didn't gather with the Void Strike Sect's army. No one knew what they were planning. Don't be nervous. I'm here today to admire your Renhuang martial arts. The Dao Sect's techniques are unpredictable. The Void Strike Sect's Void Strike Divine Palm is all-pervasive. As for the inheritance, it has nothing to do with me. The Tai Sui Emperor said with a cheeky smile. Beside him, Dui Tianchong's face was extremely gloomy. Obviously, he had other intentions. Ji Bieqiu could naturally see that the other party was watching the fire burning across the river and wanted to reap the benefits. However, Ji Bieqiu didn't say anything. He warned coldly, "You better not interfere." "Hey, Ji Bieqiu, do you think I'm nothing but air?" Ji Bieqiu stomped his foot in the air. Instantly, space rumbled violently beneath his foot while strands of cracks spread out like a net of lightning, and it brought terrifying pressure to the disciples of the Taoist sect below. No one dares to treat the Emperor of the Void Strike sect as heir. "Tell me, what do you want?" "Hand over the inheritance." The Emperor of the Void Strike sect was flustered. "My disciple fused with it." "Then hand him over." "Impossible." Ji Bieqiu refused straightforwardly. At this moment, the boundless space fell into silence. The Taoist sect master and the Emperor of the Void Strike sect stood across from each other. Their eyes were like swords. Only the whistling of the wind filled with killing intent could be heard. The atmosphere became more and more oppressive. "You're forcing the old man to bully the weak." Seeing this, the Emperor of the Void Strike sect slowly stood up from his chariot. With a slight movement, the airflow in the sky became chaotic. Astral winds raged and were comparable to thousands of blades and swords. An extremely terrifying emperors will press down. Then, a 7-story golden pagoda appeared in the Emperor of the Void Strike sect's hand. "Disciples, dodge!" Ji Bieqiu exclaimed. He didn't hold back the Emperor's qi in his body. He pushed out with both palms, blasting out a layer of 8 trigrams Dao diagram that covered the entire sky. At the same time, Shi Yongnian and Bo Shang attacked at the same time. The Emperor's qi madly poured into the 8 trigrams Dao diagram. Although the 3 Taoist sects' specialties were different, their Taoist techniques were extremely similar. After thousands of years of practice, they almost instantly came from the same source. Naturally, they knew how to increase the power of Ji Bieqiu's 8 trigrams Dao diagram. The 3 emperors worked together. The Dao diagram grew larger and larger. It was like a divine light descending from the heavens. It stuck close to the sect's protective formation and turned into a second line of defense. The 7-story golden pagoda in the Emperor of the Void Strike sect's hand was a supreme grade Emperor artifact. Rumble. The pagoda was thrown out of his hand. Surging Emperor's qi poured into it. The will of the Emperor of the Void Strike sect merged with the divine pagoda, as if it had become his incarnation. The divine pagoda bloomed with dazzling power. It was like a mountain of the great path was crushing the universe. Almost as soon as it came into contact with the sect's protective formation, the formation light collapsed into pieces. Puff! 3 mouthfuls of blood sprayed out at the same time. Ji Bieqiu and the other 2 worked together, but they could only maintain the 8 trigrams Dao diagram for a few breaths. In the next moment, the light of the way dissipated. The Dao diagram that covered the sky and the sun fell apart. The bodies of the 3 sect leaders that the disciples relied on fell together with the pagoda. They fell heavily on the training field, shaking the ground and shaking the main peak. The disciples looked at this extremely shocking scene. It was as if the sky had collapsed. The peak's protective formation that the Taoist sect had worked so hard to maintain could not withstand a single blow from the divine pagoda of the Emperor of the Void Strike sect. How could they bear this? Was there such a great disparity in strength between the 2 sides? At this moment, fear turned into a haze that devoured their souls. The disciples of the Taoist sects were in despair. Education 123 Literature Network. Chapter 1677. Blood stained their clothes. Their spiritual souls were shaken, and they lost their hearing. Jean Bieqiu and the other 2 fell for a few seconds, unable to get up from the ground for a long time. The sky-striking sect is not simple. In the crowd, Qin Hao was slightly surprised. The yellow-browed elder was in the 6th tier of the Renwang realm. He used the momentum of heaven and earth to release the power of the imperial weapon. Deputy Headmaster Bo was in the 2nd tier of the Matrix Emperor realm. The deployment of the Matrix was not done overnight. The wider the coverage, the stronger the power of the Matrix, and the more it tested the ability of the Matrix Maker. It was even more difficult to build a protective Matrix. However, after the power of the Matrix was activated, the effect was often very strong. It was not a problem for the Matrix Maker to be several levels higher. Even though the yellow-browed elder was in the 6th tier of the Renwang realm, it was not easy for him to destroy the matrix of the main peak. Moreover, Jean Biechio and the other two tried their best to stop him, but they were still crushed in one blow. The key was the tower in the yellow-browed elder's hand. It was not an ordinary imperial weapon. It was a top-grade imperial weapon with very advanced forging techniques. It was extremely powerful. Top-grade imperial weapons were rare. It was difficult for ordinary Ren Huang to get them. Qin Hao was surprised that the sky-striking sect had one. I thought that even if the Taoist sect was defeated, the 3 headmasters could still fight. I secretly did something, and this disaster was over. If the sky-striking sect did not have a top-grade imperial weapon, Qin Hao did not need to expose himself at all. But in the current situation, his identity as the Tribulation Sword Emperor could not be hidden. Fine. Before he left Dao's sect, he would show off his divine power in front of everyone. Other than giving Dao's sect a surprise, he would also make sure Dong and Qing proud for once. He would leave their beautiful days in the halo of the Tribulation Sword Sovereign. As for Qin Hao's true identity, it would always be a secret. Father, headmaster, uncle, everyone rushed over and helped the 3 of them up from the ground. They did not expect that the sky-striking great ancestor would injure the 3 pillars of the Taoist sect with just one blow. It also destroyed all the unrealistic thoughts of the disciples. Today, the Taoist sect was facing a disaster. Cough, cough. Top-grade imperial weapons are indeed powerful. It seems that the situation I was most worried about has happened. Zhu Biqiu channeled his emperor force and suppressed his surging qi and blood. He looked up at the end of the void, as if he was looking for a terrifying figure. Nephew Quan, when I saw all of you injured, the old man felt extremely pained as well. Thinking back to the past, the old man had once tasted tea with your grandfather on this Dao Peak. But what about all of you? You ordered your disciples to kill the top prodigy of the Strike Kong sect. If I don't come and demand an explanation for the deaths of Lu Guang and Lin Chong, how will the people of Nanjiang view me, the great ancestor Strike Kong? The yellow-browed old man's voice trembled. The moment the great formation was destroyed, he held the resplendent pagoda in his hand and directly floated above Jiu Biqiu's head, looking down at him. Do you still want to resist? Jean Biqiu smiled bitterly, revealing his sadness. He raised his head and said, Senior Nia has personally come to Dao Mountain with a top-grade imperial weapon. The 3 of us are not strong enough. How can we continue to resist? Forefather Zhang Kong felt very comfortable when he heard this. He stroked his beard proudly. Big brother. Bo Shang was shocked. Were they prepared to hand him over? Shi Yongnian lowered his head and clenched his fists. Hand him over? Even if his big brother really planned to do so, he could not hand Shi Dong over. The Shi clan owed that child too much. Don't be a coward, Jiu Biqiu. I'm waiting to admire your 8 trigrams. The Tai Sui Emperor also swaggered over in the void with a mocking smile on his face. If you have a problem with Senior Nia, you can go all out and try the power of a top-grade imperial weapon. Jiu Biqiu replied coldly. You have a problem with me? Forefather Strike Kong looked at the Tai Sui Emperor. The light of the pagoda in his hand flowed, and a devouring pressure fell on the Tai Sui Emperor's head. No, I have no problem with it. The Tai Sui Emperor quickly admitted defeat and was extremely embarrassed. Stop wasting time, Jiu Biqiu. Hurry up and hand him over. The Strike Kong sect emperor hovered next to the yellow-browed old man, looking victorious. That's right. Hand him over. I came here this time to ask for someone from the Dao Gate. Your Her Garden's alchemist Li Chuji spoke rudely to my Tai Sui Mountain. Today, I'll teach him a lesson. The Tai Sui Emperor's gaze swept over and sharply caught sight of Qin Hao's figure. He shouted, "Li Chuji, get out here." The inheritance of a monarch? With forefather, Strike, Kong pressuring him, the Tai Sui Emperor clearly had no chance. Qin Hao had threatened Elder Song in the Monarch tomb, which was a great disrespect to the Tai Sui Mountain. Moreover, Sherdong's current achievements were largely due to his master. Dui Tianchong was humiliated and could not get back at Sherdong, so the Tai Sui Emperor started with Li Chuji. Qin Hao stood in the crowd and smiled. He looked at the Tai Sui Emperor without a trace of reverence and had no intention of walking out. "Senior Nya, please allow me to say something. Sherdong has the bloodline of the Shi clan of the Dao Gate and has fused with the inheritance. If you strip away the inheritance of the corpse monarch, it will definitely cause immeasurable damage to Sherdong. Ask yourself, if Jiobi Chio brought people to strike Kong's sect and asked you to hand over your grandson, what would you do?" Jiobi Chio cried out in pain. His eyes were gradually filled with blood. "In your opinion, how should we deal with Sherdong?" Forefather Strike Kong's mouth twitched. If their positions were switched, he naturally would not hand over his grandson so easily. "I'll fight with Nyeli." Jiobi Chio gritted his teeth and pointed at the Strike Kong sect emperor. "If I lose, I'll hand him over without hesitation. If I win—" He paused. The yellow-brow ancestor replied, "Fine. If you win, the old man will turn around and leave without hesitation. Since I know your grandfather, the old man will give you juniors a chance. If you lose, you'll give up the Dao Gate and disband the Dao Gate. How about it?" The space froze. The vast square, and even the people of the two factions felt suffocated. "Creak." Jiobi Chio clenched his fists and said, "Accept the challenge. If I lose, the Dao Gate will cease to exist." "Leah." Forefather Strike Kong looked at the Strike Kong sect emperor. Nyeli smiled lightly with a trace of disdain. "If I lose to you, Jiobi Chio, I won't care about the emperor's tomb. I'll stand upside down and eat feces in front of everyone." "Lose? How could he lose?" Jiobi Chio was a third-tier Renhuang, while Nyeli was a fourth-tier Renhuang. Although the gap was not big, and there was only a slight difference, as the Strike Kong sect emperor, he was also a peerless genius. Nyeli's arrogance was no less than the dead Lu Guang's. "Father, you're injured." Shirqing looked extremely worried. "If there was a better way, I wouldn't want to fight with him while injured. Unfortunately, we don't have any other way. Nyeli, let me have a taste of your strike air palm." Jiobi Chio shouted. The Renhuang light on his body flickered as he slowly rose into the air. "My strike air palm will definitely not disappoint you." The Strike Kong sect emperor, Nyeli, also had the Renhuang light surging in his body. In his peak state, his aura was even stronger than Jiobi Chio's. He slowly rose until he was at the same height as his opponent. Suddenly, the battle that would determine the fate of the Dao Gate was about to be decided. This battle was about the dignity of the two Renhuangs. This battle was about Sherdong's future. This battle could also be the last battle between Jiobi Chio and Nyeli. "You're so stubborn. Why do you have to do this?" Qin Hao shook his head gently. He was about to attack, but he restrained himself. Chapter 1678. Translator, Transin Editor. Transin let us burn together. Elder Striking Kong held a supreme grade Emperor artifact in his hand, easily shattering the Dao Peak's great formation. Today, even if he were to sacrifice himself, he would not be able to stop their advance. That would only cause more casualties to the Dao sect's disciples. Jean Biechio had suffered some internal injuries. It was better to fight Nyeli one-on-one than to send all the disciples of the mountain to their deaths. This was because the result could not be changed. However, he had won by a fluke, and the higher-ups of the three sects had witnessed it. Today, the Striking Kong sect had brought along countless smaller forces. Even if the Striking Kong sect was unwilling, he couldn't slap his own face, right? After all, the promise had already been made. Qin Hao could understand Zhou Bichio's intentions, but the Airstrike sect would not give up on the inheritance. If they could not get it this time, They would find an excuse to attack Dao Mountain again in the future. At this moment, in the sky above the dojo, Giobiechio and Yeli's bodies rose higher and higher. Two imperial auras enveloped the boundless space. Their wills penetrated madly, trying to crush each other. The people of the three clans watched the battle with rapt attention. It was rare for Renhuangs to fight, so it was worth their time to watch carefully. They could comprehend the essence of the Renhuangs' martial arts. Moreover, this battle was crucial to the fate of the two sections. Those from Taisui Mountain appeared to be very excited. Regardless of the outcome, it had nothing to do with them. After all, it was not Taisui Emperor who was fighting. Deafening cheers came from the army of cultivators led by the airstrike sect. Their momentum was so great that it could topple mountains and overturn seas. It gave the airstrike Dao Emperor great confidence. On the other hand, the disciples of the Dao sect were filled with worry. Their sect master was already at the first level of the Dao Emperor realm. Moreover, he was fighting while injured. Once they lost, not only would they have to hand over Sherdong, but the Qilin Dao sect would also cease to exist. Big brother, hold on. Shi Yongnian clenched his fists nervously. The three of them had always worked together. They wished they could fight Emperor Kong Dao together with Giobiechio. Giobiechio, let this emperor see the progress of her martial arts in recent years. Nelly said coldly. Dazzling golden flames whizzed out, and a terrifying whirlwind seemed to roll up in the sky. Giobiechio formed a seal with his palms, and the power of his bloodline surged. A dazzling 8 trigrams appeared beneath his feet. Qian, Zhun, Sun, ancient runes flowed out and surrounded his body. At this moment, Giobiechio's pupils constricted slightly. An ancient character was summoned by the mortal emperor's will, and it shone with dazzling light. It was like a sharp sword of qi that pierced towards the striking Dao Emperor. The striking Kong Dao Emperor laughed lightly with disdain. You dare not use your full strength when fighting me while injured? Destroy. As soon as he finished speaking, the space around the striking sky, Dao Emperor, surged with the sound of fluctuation. He didn't seem to have made any movement, yet the piercing sword qi seemed to have been crushed by an invisible and enormous force, and it was directly shattered into pieces. Qin Hao felt that there was a powerful force in the sky. It was different from the Taisui astral energy of Taisui Mountain. It could shatter the sword qi without a trace. This strike-air Dao Emperor could actually use the Dao to injure people from a distance. No wonder it was called the strike-air sect. Interesting. Giobiechio's face didn't change at all. They were both powerful cultivators of the same era, so they were naturally very familiar with each other's Dao techniques. The 8 trigrams under his feet spun, and an ancient character flew out. His will merged into it, and then it shone brightly. The ancient character evolved into a towering mountain and pressed down. At this moment, the void rumbled, and the space seemed to be crushed. The striking Kong Dao Emperor looked up with a serious expression. The force above his head was very strong, and the blood in his body surged. Strands of Emperor power condensed in his palm, and a dazzling flame burst out. It was so fast that it couldn't be blinked. He slammed his palm in the air, and there was still no movement. However, the space was filled with rolling thunder. It was as if there was an extremely terrifying sound wave moving forward and crashing into the mountain. In an instant, the mountain collapsed. Giobiechio groaned, and a few drops of blood slowly dripped from the corner of his mouth. The aura around him fluctuated. You're still holding on with your internal injuries. Qin Hao knew that Giobiechio was affected by his internal injuries, and the mountain formed by the 8 trigrams Dao character didn't have the effect it should have. At this rate, it would be extremely difficult to defeat the striking Kong Dao Emperor. The killing will within the 7 kills pagoda is corroding your organs. If you don't resolve it and continue to exhaust yourself with me, your injuries will spread and worsen. In the end, you'll be injured for the rest of your life, Nelly said. Then I'll use all my strength to end it in one strike. Giobiechio raised his palms high, and the 8 trigrams under his feet spun violently. An even more turbulent soul power was released in the form of light, and it continuously merged into the ancient characters. The will of the 8 trigrams Tao character suddenly skyrocketed, and they let out a heavy rumble. One by one, they left his body and blasted towards Nieli side by side. At this moment, the scene in the sky above the peak of the path reversed. Thunder and lightning intertwined, and countless storms were born. The ancient characters flickered with golden light, releasing different will of the way. They devoured everything and wanted to bury the striking Kong, Tao Emperor. Nieli frowned. Zhibiqiu had indeed used his full strength this time. Even though he was fighting with injuries and wasn't in his best condition, he still couldn't be underestimated. With a deep shout, the striking Kong Tao Emperor stood there like a god of war. He raised his palms high as well, and his body transformed into tens of thousands of raging streams of air. His entire body was concealed within the streams of air. If it was any other time, he might be slightly fearful when facing Zhibiqiu's 8 ancient characters. But now that Zhibiqiu was injured, what did he have to fear? Waves of muffled sound spread out, penetrating the void without a trace. Everyone felt as if there were countless streams of palm qi passing through the space, madly bombarding the 8 ancient characters like a storm. Even though they couldn't see it, the 8 ancient characters constantly flickered with explosive light. It was as if they were struck by palm after palm strike, and cracks gradually appeared. They shook violently until cracks covered every single one of the Tao characters. Boom! Boom! A series of sonic booms resounded through the world, and the 8 characters finally split apart and collapsed. Almost at the same time, Zhibiqiu, who was standing on 8 trigrams, seemed to have been struck by tens of thousands of palms. His protective sovereign qi was gradually scattered and penetrated. His cyan Qilin Taoist robe was reduced to pieces under the torrential bombardment. Shocking palm prints appeared on the Renhuang's body one after another. Every time a palm landed, Zhibiqiu's legs gave the illusion that he was kneeling down, but he stubbornly held on. Blood kept flowing from his mouth, and he looked very miserable. Sect Master, Father, Zhou Qing, and everyone else shed tears. The injured Zhibiqiu couldn't resist the striking Kong Tao Emperor after all. Shi Yongyan and Bo Shang clenched their fists so hard that blue veins popped out. The countless palm prints that penetrated the void seemed to have hit them at the same time. Seeing Zhibiqiu being bombarded made their hearts ache. But at this moment, the two of them didn't panic because they knew that Zhibiqiu still had one more move. It was the ultimate emperor's method of Taoism that had never been revealed to the outside world. Do you still want to hold on? In the raging airflow, the striking Kong Tao Emperor stood with his hands behind his back. The Renhuangs were condensed into terrifying palm prints and bombarded Zhibiqiu's body like a torrential downpour. Hand over the inheritance, disband Taoism, and you'll still be Zhibiqiu. If you resist to the end, I'm afraid you won't be able to keep your life. Why do you have to do this? Just admit defeat. Lose. Zhibiqiu raised his head. Blood kept flowing from his mouth. His body was bombarded and could fall at any time, but the sharpness in his eyes didn't diminish. The one who loses may not be me. What? Nieli frowned. He felt that something was wrong. Lin Bing Do Zhijie Zhen Lai Qian Xing. Condense. Ignoring the blood and vomiting, Zhibiqiu seemed to have used all the strength in his body. His palms formed an ancient formula. Chapter 1679. Lin, Bing, and Doju advanced in formation. This was the most complete scripture of Taoism, the 9-word celestial art. There were only 9 words in the 9 words celestial formula, and each word contained an incomparably powerful will of the Tao. To comprehend, cultivate, and master all of them, and use them in battle, one would need unimaginable perseverance and extraordinary talent of the cultivator. Otherwise, one would not be able to comprehend the essence of the 9-word celestial art. Not long ago, Zhu Biechio had just comprehended the eighth word. He did not expect to use it in battle so soon. Moreover, his opponent was the striking Kong Dao Emperor. The 9 words celestial art was extremely destructive. Once it was used, it could not be interrupted. Even Zhu Biechio himself could not stop it. Once the celestial art was used, the enemy would definitely die unless they had enough power to kill the user. The striking Kong Dao Emperor's strength was similar to the Taoism sect leaders. Even though Zhu Biechio was injured internally, Nili did not have the cultivation to kill him. Therefore, the striking Kong Dao Emperor would definitely lose this battle. Of course, Zhu Biechio would not have it easy either. He had comprehended the 8 words, but forcefully formed the 9 words celestial art. The price of the 9 words celestial art was his life spirit. Incomparably violent might of the way roared, shaking the heavens and the earth. Space collapsed under the power of the way, and terrifying cracks crisscrossed. The moment the 9 words celestial mantra was uttered from Zhu Biechio's mouth, the everlasting peak of the way seemed to let out a cry. At this moment, Zhu Biechio's imperial power skyrocketed. 9 rays of celestial light descended from the sky and landed on the striking Kong Dao Emperor's head. Nieli felt his scalp go numb. The celestial light that pressed down on him made his soul tremble. This power was too terrifying. In the training ground, Shi Yongnian and Bo Sheng looked up quietly. Zhu Biechio's celestial light surged to the extreme, but they could not help but cry. They knew that once the celestial art was used, the Zhou clan would lose their leader. The Taoism sect would no longer have a sect leader Zhou. Nya Li's eyes widened. He looked at the Taoism sect leader in the celestial light in shock. Was he hiding such a terrifying celestial art? Why had he never seen him use it before? Could it be an imperial art passed down from the peak of the Taoism sect? No one knew how terrifying the 9-word celestial art was because today was the first time in 1,000 years. At this moment, the heavens and the earth seemed to be roaring. Boundless immortal light crushed down towards the sky above Dao Emperor, and the terrifying might of the Dao caused all the spectators to feel terrified. Among the spectators, the Tai Sui Emperor's palm had been placed on his chest, as if he couldn't breathe. He stared at everything with his eyes wide open. Earlier, he had said that he wanted to admire the power of the Taoist sect master's mysterious method. Now that he had seen it, it brought him a deep shadow of fear. Ancestor Ji Kong was unable to remain calm. His heart pounded violently as his eyes were filled with disbelief. Just what grade of power was the 9-word celestial light? Emperor grade? It actually made him shudder with fear. Nieli was afraid that he would be in danger. However, there was no way to stop this. Victory and defeat hadn't been decided yet, and whoever interfered first would be eliminated. Ancestor Ji Kong didn't dare act rashly, and even Ji Biechio couldn't stop even if he wanted to. Stop it. Stop it for this emperor. Nieli felt death approaching for the first time. The will of the Ren Huang in his body completely erupted, and there seemed to be countless palms piercing through the void. All of them slammed towards the Taoist sect master, and Ji Biechio was on the verge of collapse. Ji Biechio stomped his foot, and the 8 trigrams flew up like a huge millstone that blotted out the sky. It pressed down on Yeli's head and merged with the 9 immortal shadows. The 9 words celestial art flowed in the Dao diagram, replacing the positions of Qian, Zhen, Sun, and Kansas. At this moment, the light of the Dao diagram rushed into the sky and raged. It was incomparably sacred, as if an immortal formation had descended upon the world. It was unstoppable. Ji Biechio, you're crazy. Even though you've severely injured me, you're definitely going to die. Nieli went completely berserk. His will drove the divine palm of the void to attack wildly, and the violent power blasted Ji Biechio into a bloody mess. Crazy? As long as you're defeated, the Taoist sect won't lose. Even though I'm dead, the Taoist sect will still exist. We've lost a sect master, but there will be thousands of sect masters in the future. Blood kept dripping down from his face, and the indescribable pain numbed his nerves. Perhaps his bones had already been shattered, but GB Chio stood upright with his hot blood and a crazy smile on his face. Even if he died, what was there to fear? Dong would carry the Taoist sect and become an even more outstanding sect master than him. He might even become the second Taoist ancestor. Father. Qing was sobbing below. Father and daughter were connected by heart, and they could feel GB Chio's will to die, as well as his reluctance to part with the Taoist sect. Perhaps her father was regretful that he couldn't personally see Dong lead the Taoist sect to greatness. Rumble. Rumbles continued in the void, as if the heavens were collapsing. The Taoist diagram that covered the sky pressed down on the striking emperor's head, and the celestial light of the 9 words flowed within it. Nieli tried his best to raise his palms high, trying to resist it by force. However, the Taoist might contained in the Taoist diagram was boundless, and it almost shattered his arms and crushed his spiritual soul. Even though Nieli howled madly to resist, he was still pressed down from the sky. However, the striking emperor's divine light released by Nieli's Renhuangs did not stop. On the verge of collapse, palm shadows finally appeared in the void, and they bombarded GB Chio in a frenzy. GB Chio seemed to have lost consciousness. His body was on the verge of collapse, and blood spurted out of his mouth like a fountain. He laughed loudly and fell at the same time as the striking emperor. Old man, stop! Grand ancestor, striking emperor roared, shaking the heavens and the earth. Surging emperor's might filled the air, and the 7 kills pagoda in his palm bloomed with terrifying killing light. He finally couldn't help but make a move. Almost at the same time, the sword energy in Qin Hao's body hummed, and wisps of tribulation light were faintly discernible, wanting to break out of his body. He couldn't just watch GB Chio die. This person was willing to do anything for the Dao sect. Of course, GB Chio didn't do anything wrong. He chose to sacrifice himself to become Dong and help the Dao sect. He protected the foundation of the Dao sect that had been passed down for thousands of years with his death. His spirit was extremely precious. Admit defeat, we admit defeat. Emperor Yuan's inheritance is here. Senior striking emperor, please spare sect master Ji's life. Just as Qin Hao and grand ancestor striking emperor were about to make a move, a shout suddenly sounded from the direction of the Dao Palace. It was especially abrupt and ear-piercing at this critical moment. After that, 2 figures flew into the battlefield at the same time. Surprisingly, it was Jinhua and Dong. To everyone's astonishment, Jinhua was holding a sword against Dong's neck, and he was loudly begging for mercy from the Skystrike Dao Emperor. Blood was about to flow out, and his body was about to turn into meat paste. When the Dao sect master, who had endured countless attacks from Dao Emperor striking emperor, saw this scene, he was so angry that he trembled violently and almost fainted on the spot. His mind was unstable, and with a loud bang, the Dao diagram that flowed with immortal light shattered and exploded. Die! The force that suppressed the Dao Emperor's soul dissipated, and it was as if he had just escaped from the gates of hell. The Dao Emperor's expression was ferocious, and he looked for an opportunity to attack Jiu Chio with his fingers. In an instant, a sharp sound pierced through space and blasted onto the 2 bodies. Puff! Puff! Shi Yongnian and Bo Shang vomited blood at the same time. The 2 of them hugged GB Chio tightly with both hands and withstood Dao Emperor striking emperor's attack with their backs. They managed to save GB Chio, but the moment they landed on the ground, 3 figures collapsed. Haha! These people from the Dao sect. Grand ancestor striking emperor laughed until he was out of breath. The light of the 7 kills pagoda in his hand dissipated. He was about to make a move, but in the end, the Dao sect admitted defeat. Not only did they admit defeat, but someone even personally handed over the inheritance. GB Chio, on the other hand, was pitiful. Chapter 1680. The boundless space of the Mountain of the Way fell into a dead silence. Only great ancestor Ji Kong's earth-shattering laughter could be heard, as well as Nye Li's angry and heavy breathing. He had almost been killed by the 9 words celestial mantra. If it weren't for the appearance of the 2 Taoists at the critical moment, Nye Li would have been able to defeat or even kill Tao Emperor Ji Kong before he died. If that had happened, the inheritance would not have been taken away from the Taoists today. Unfortunately, Shi Jinhua made Ji Biechio's efforts go to waste. Everything he had sacrificed was in vain. Great ancestor Ji Kong laughed crazily and coughed. Within the Mountain of the Way, all the disciples saw the 3 Taoists fall to the ground. They were all silent, as if they were using silence to express their endless sorrow. "You bastard!" Shi was trembling all over. He pointed at Shi Jinhua. If it weren't for Shi Dong's life, he would have rushed up and slapped him to death. Elder Yu immediately rushed to Ji Biechio and the other 2. The old man, who was usually muddle-headed, was now extremely cautious and serious. He checked the 3's injuries one by one and methodically took out various pills for them to take. Ji Biechio's injuries were the most serious. His body was damaged, his organs were damaged, and many of his bones were broken. His body was almost smashed into a pulp by Nye Li's palm. The foundation of a Run Huang was deep enough. Given time to recuperate, his injuries could be healed in 100 years. What made Elder Yu helpless was that the soul in Ji Biechio's body was rapidly dissipating. The will of the last word of the 9 words celestial mantra was forcefully condensed by his life spirit. Such a price could not be made up for in a lifetime. Shi Yongnian and Bo Shang's situation wasn't optimistic either. Like Jiu Biechio, they also had internal injuries. Nye Li had mercilessly attacked them like a malicious spirit, but in the end, all of his attacks had landed on their bodies. It would be very difficult for them to recover in a few decades. This battle should not have ended like this. The worst-case scenario would have been the death of the Taoists. Shi Jinhua's surprising actions had pushed the 3 of them into a pit of fire. "Grandfather, you don't have to look at me like that. Everything I did was for the Taoists." Shi Jinhua faced the crowd. His hand holding the sword was trembling violently. His heart was pounding, and he was also very afraid. After all, he was no different from a traitor of the Tao sect. However, for the sake of protecting Shi Dong, the Qilin Tao Mountain destroyed the legacy of their ancestors. It was unfair to the Tao sect, unfair to the disciples of the Tao sect, and unfair to the ancestors of the Tao sect. Shi Jinhua didn't want this to happen. He also wanted the sect to prosper. However, the situation had already reached a point where it could not be disobeyed. Why did he have to persist? Why couldn't they sacrifice Shi Dong to protect the Tao sect, protect the disciples of the Tao Mountain, and protect the foundation of their ancestors? Shi Jinhua's temples were throbbing violently, and heavy breaths came out of his nostrils. Because of his nervousness, his eyes gradually became bloodshot. He did not do anything wrong. He did it for the Tao sect, for everyone, and, of course, for himself. Even if he had to bear the name of a traitor, he felt that it was worth it. The future disciples of Taoism would definitely be able to be ordinary for him. Only the future generations would understand his deep sense of righteousness. He was a hero. Taoism. Do you know what is Taoism? Hearing Shi Jinhua's anxious call, Jean Biechio took a deep breath and slowly opened his eyes. He looked at Shi Jinhua, and the look in his eyes was too heart-wrenching. Taoism? Why was Taoism established at the beginning? Because they were like-minded, and the ancestors of the 3 clans had the same ambitions. That was why Qilin Taoism Mountain was created. Taoism Mountain was only a name. It didn't represent anything. Only the martial will of the 3 clans could be considered the true Taoism, and all of this had to be built on the foundation of talents. Taoism Mountain would only exist if people existed. Only geniuses could carry the martial tradition of Taoism Mountain. If Taoism Mountain was empty, what was the use of leaving an empty mountain? Could it be called Taoism? Of course, if a person's cultivation was strong enough to intimidate the 4 regions and 8 desolations, like Dindi who fell in Daqin 600 years ago. Then to the sect, there was another layer of explanation. It could be said that Dindi was the Daqin. Without Dindi, Daqin was only an empty shell. Coincidentally, Sherdong had this kind of temperament. His future was enough to support the will of Taoism alone. As long as he existed, Taoism Mountain would exist. Everyone who saw Sherdong would involuntarily revere Taoism. Unfortunately, Shi Jinhua's vision was too narrow. He couldn't understand Ji Biechio at all. His understanding of Taoism wasn't at the level of the sect master. If it was, he wouldn't have done such a ridiculous thing. We entrusted Sherdong to you. Do you know how much trust we have in you? Shi Yongyan sadly shook his head. Perhaps Shi Jinhua was really afraid of death. There was an ancient formation buried under the Taoism temple. It was personally laid down by a certain ancestor. At a critical moment, it could eliminate a problem for Taoism and instantly transfer disciples. It was too old. Ji Biechio had checked it and found that the formation was malfunctioning. Even if Bo Shang tried his best to restore a part of the formation, the number of people transferred was extremely small. Handing Shi Dong to Shi Jinhua was equivalent to entrusting the hope of Taoism to him. While saving Shi Dong, wasn't also giving Shi Jinhua a way out. However, he had completely betrayed the trust of the three. Ha! My three nephews, you can deal with the internal affairs of Taoism later. Now that Ji Biechio has been defeated by Nieli, according to the agreement, I will bring him to Mount Strike Kong. Patriarch Strike Kong spoke and stepped into the air. He did not wait for a reply and directly walked towards Shi Dong and Shi Jinhua. Obviously, regardless of whether Taoism was willing or not, he was going to forcefully take them away. How dare you? Ji Biechio tried his best to stand out and stop him. Shi Yongyan and Bo Shang did the same. Unfortunately, they could no longer support their heavily injured bodies. Whoosh! At this moment, nearly 1,000 disciples of Taoism stepped forward at the same time. They turned into a tide of people and surrounded Shi Dong and Shi Jinhua in the center. Form the formation. Ji Biechio roared. Behind him, 30 to 40 disciples released their primordial qi at the same time. Suddenly, a surge of fiery radiance rose into the air and turned into a wall of fire in front of them. Shi Lang's legs trembled. He glanced at Shi Jinhua with disdain and stepped forward firmly. A sword formation radiance was led by him and turned into streaks of sword qi that wandered above the wall of fire. Bo Ming formed a palm and drew a yin and yang. The disciples of the martial pavilion worked together, and a huge yin and yang formation radiance surged out, forming a path in front of Patriarch Strike Kong. The three clans of Taoism swore not to hand them over. You guys are silly. Shi Jinhua's eyes were wet as he looked at the hot-blooded scene. Even the disciples of the Sword Valley were not afraid of death and defended the dignity of Taoism. For some reason, at this moment, Shi Jinhua suddenly felt a surge of regret. Could it be that he was really wrong? Get out of the way for old man. Patriarch Strike Kong saw that a group of Taoism juniors dared to stop him. It was as if his face had been stomped on. He waved his Taoist robe, and suddenly, the weather in the training hall changed. A terrifying wind swept forward and turned into a twisting storm. He wanted to see who could stop him today. The powerful will of Ren Huang crushed, and the storm roared. Although Ji Biechio and the other two formed a formation in front of him, they seemed so insignificant in front of Patriarch Strike Kong. Has the Taoist sect finally reached the end of its days? Woo woo woo. At this moment, an inexplicable sigh came from the depths of the souls of countless disciples. It sounded like the sigh of an old man. Not only the disciples, but all the elders, deacons, and even the three severely injured sect leaders heard it at the same time. It sounded from the depths of the Tao Peak. It was real and seemed to come from a long time ago. At this moment, everyone could not help but think of an old story that had been passed down for a long time in Qilin Taoism. The Tao Mountain had a spirit. The Tao ancestor was buried in it. The ancestral spirits had protected the Tao Mountain for generations and did not allow outsiders to invade it. Could it be that the Tao ancestor had appeared? Pairs of astonished eyes looked at each other. It was not an illusion, and not only one person heard it. The disciples of Taoism got the answer from the eyes of their fellow disciples. Crash! An ear-piercing, shattering sound spread out like a mirror falling to the ground. The terrifying storm that was roaring forward was shattered into nothingness in front of a figure that appeared out of nowhere. Chapter 1681. No one could confirm whether the ancestral lord had shown up or not. The sigh came and disappeared suddenly, giving people an illusion. But one thing was certain, Li Chuji was definitely not an ordinary saint-level alchemist. At this moment, Li Chuji was floating in the air between ancestral Lord Ji Kong and the Taoist disciples. In front of him was the ancestral Lord Ji Kong, and behind him were the defeated Taoist disciples. Before the storm could get close, it disappeared in an instant, which was a huge shock to everyone. Ancestral Lord Ji Kong's cultivation was so strong that he treated the sect protection array as if it was just a decoration. The three sect masters were no match for him, but Li Chuji appeared and directly restrained him on the spot. The latter even looked calm. Ancestral Lord Ji Kong's eyes narrowed to the size of a needle tip. There were other powerful cultivators besides Si Biechio and the other two. He asked, "Who is it?" Qin Hao glanced at the other party indifferently, as if he was looking at an ant. The corners of his mouth curled into a disdainful smile. He turned around and did not give any response. His figure drifted towards Shi Jianhua. Along the way, the crowd of Taoist disciples took the initiative to open up a path. Third, Elder Chu. Tao Wu's eyes were filled with shock when he saw Qin Hao walk past him. Third, Elder Chu. You. Elder Qi stepped forward and wanted to speak, but he found that he couldn't even call out the other party's name. In the blink of an eye, Li Chuji had become so unfamiliar. Qin Hao didn't respond to anyone. The disciples opened a path for him. He stood directly in front of Shi Jianhua. His usual cheeky face was extremely cold at this moment. Shi Jianhua didn't even dare to meet Qin Hao's eyes. "Let go." Two simple words were spat out, mixed with a killing intent that penetrated the soul. With a crash, Shi Jianhua's hand trembled, and the sharp sword on Shi Dong's neck immediately fell to the ground. The flexible blade even bounced a few times when it touched the stone floor. Gulp! Shi Jianhua swallowed a mouthful of saliva with difficulty, his throat cracking. Unknowingly, his legs became numb, and he became stiff on the spot, not daring to move at all. Shi Jianhua was not a fool. He did not release any aura, but he was able to disperse the might of the great ancestor of the 6th Renhuang realm. What level did this Li Chuji belong to? Master. Shi Dong smiled helplessly, his voice filled with humiliation. Early this morning, he had been summoned by the sect master to the Taoist hall. As a result, as soon as he entered, his cultivation was sealed by Zhan Biechio on the spot. If he had known that the sect master was willing to sacrifice the entire Taoist mountain just to protect him, he definitely would not have set foot in the Taoist hall. He, Shi Dong, was not someone who feared death. There was also Shi Jianhua. Because Shi Dong's cultivation was sealed, he was unable to move. This allowed the scum of the Taoist sect to take advantage of the situation and place a sword on his neck. He felt that he had embarrassed Qin Hao. Qing, take good care of your junior brother. Qin Hao waved his hand, and an infinite amount of energy enveloped Shi Dong, easily dissolving Zhan Biechio's pressure. Then, he walked towards Elder Yu. "You want me to take care of my junior brother again? You're always saying the same thing." Qing, as usual, complained. However, her eyes were filled with tears of excitement. Her gaze was fixed on her master's back. At this moment, she knew that her master was not a simple person. Junior 3, Biechio, and the others are very pitiful. As Qin Hao walked over, Elder Yu let out a pained sigh and took the initiative to step aside. Qin Hao nodded and squatted down slowly. His deep eyes flashed with a sharp light, giving people a deep sense of pressure. In an instant, he saw through the three situation. Pitiful. Indeed, pitiful. Putting aside the Renhuang's physical body, Zhang Biqiu's most serious injury was his yuan soul. He suffered from the backlash of the 9 words celestial art. His soul was almost drained dry, and his yuan soul had collapsed. If he was treated with normal methods, he would not be able to survive. However, it was precisely because of Shi Jinhua's appearance that Zhang Biqiu's Dao heart was affected, causing his will to become unstable. The power of the 9 words celestial art was not fully released. There was still a bit of soul power left in his body, although it dissipated very quickly. Once Dilly suppressed it and used the tranquil water to stabilize his broken yuan soul, there was a high chance that he would recover. However, this would take some time. As for Shi Yongyan and Bo Shang's injuries, they were only flesh wounds and were nothing to worry about. Junior 3, we can't be saved. Take Shidong and leave. You guys go. Zhang Biqiu's breathing was very fast, as if his life was coming to an end. Although he did not know Qin Hao's true identity, he believed that Li Chuji had the ability to save them after seeing him disperse the great ancestor Zhang Kong's will. Don't talk when you're sick. I'll take care of everything from now on. Qin Hao slowly stood up. An incomparably dazzling sword aura whizzed out of his body, forming a raging whirlwind. The brilliant sword will of the great path flowed through his body, making him look like a sword god. He lowered his head to look at the 3 people. 3 beams of sword aura shot out from his fingertips. The crystal-clear sword aura penetrated their bodies and pierced into their blood vessels. Zhang Biqiu and the other 2 people's bodies convulsed at the same time. It was as if they had been struck by an electric current. In just an instant, they felt an unprecedented surge of power. Shi Yongyan and Bo Shang were injured. Dao Emperor Zhang Kong's broken back and mangled flesh miraculously healed quickly. Crack, crack, crack. As if his bones were regenerating, a sacred rumbling sound came from Zhang Biqiu's body. Under Zhang Qing's shocked expression, he was the first to stand up shakily. How is this possible? Elder Yu pressed his palm to his chest as if he had a myocardial infarction. He felt that it was difficult to breathe. Not only did his injuries heal quickly, but he also felt that his soul power was recovering from Zhang Biqiu's aura. This sword will... Chu Sanyu, you are South Sky Peaks. Zhang Biqiu looked at Qin Hao dumbfounded. He couldn't be wrong. He had experienced it himself. It was impossible for him to be wrong. However, at this time, Qin Hao had already walked far away. He stepped into the void and went in front of great ancestor Zhang Kong. Haha, there's going to be a good show. I really didn't expect this. Bo Shang clenched his fists. He was more energetic than ever. He looked at Qin Hao's back with a smile. Big brother, take a guess. Is old Taoist Zhang Kong stronger, or is our Li Chuji stronger? Why don't the 3 of us make a bet? The heavy weight on his shoulders seemed to have been lifted out of thin air. Shi Yongyan felt relieved, like an outsider. Shut up. He is Tribulation Sword Emperor. Zhang Biqiu reprimanded him sternly. He raised his eyebrows slightly and said, I think our Chu-san might be stronger. Hiss. Gasps could be heard all around. Tribulation Sword Emperor. The Tribulation Sword Emperor who flew to Nanjiang City and occupied South Sky Peak was actually Li Chuji of the Taoist School's outer yard. This. At this moment, the worldview of many deacons of Taoist School was turned upside down. The nerves in their heads were twisted into a ball, as if they would faint at any time. I should have guessed it. He really didn't let me down. Bo Sameo nodded with incomparable appreciation. In the cemetery, the elites of the 3 sects had suffered great losses, but the combat strength of Taoist School was intact. It was very strange. Thinking about how Shi Jinhua dragged Shi Qing away and escaped, facing the siege of 2 high-level undead generals and the sea of corpses, Bo Sameo and his disciples had no chance of surviving. Were the 2 talismans that saved everyone really carved by Elder Qi? Could Elder Qi defeat 2 undead generals who were stronger than him with the talismans he carved? Nonsense. Elder Qi's cultivation hadn't improved. All of this was because Li Chuji hid too deeply and his cultivation was too strong. He was Tribulation Sword Emperor of South Sky Peak. Chapter 1682. In the martial field, after the name of tribulation, Sword Emperor spread, everyone's mood instantly rose. Today, old ancestor Ji Kong was pressuring the mountain, and the originally fearful atmosphere had changed at this moment. It gradually changed from nervousness to excitement, and a strand of anticipation arose in the hearts of everyone. Who would have thought that the tribulation Sword Emperor from the outside world would change his name to Li Chuji and become an alchemist guarding the herb garden? With such a strong cultivation, why would he lower himself to guard the herb garden for the Taoist sect? Jiubiechio and the other two had mixed feelings. They had never thought that the tribulation Sword Emperor, whom they couldn't invite with 8 palanquins, would come to the Taoist sect without anyone knowing. Could it be that all the masters like this? At this time, countless eyes were looking at Yin Qingqing and Shi Dong with envy. Li Chuji, who was despised by everyone in the herb garden, suddenly became the tribulation Sword Emperor of South Sky Peak. Many outstanding talents in South River City wanted to be his disciple, but they couldn't find a way. However, Yin Qingqing and Shi Dong were lucky to have been taught by the tribulation Sword Emperor for 8 years. Woo-woo. Yin Qingqing couldn't help it. She squatted down, hugged her legs, and cried. No one cared about her and Shi Dong before, but now? Look at these people's eyes. They were envious and longing to be the successor of the tribulation Sword Emperor like her. Shi Dong was shocked, and his eyes were sore. Was his master's real identity so powerful? But for the past 8 years, he had been guarding the herb garden, and no one had shown any interest in it. Every time Jinhua stood in front of his master, he would have an overbearing and arrogant attitude. Shi Dong didn't understand, because he didn't know that Qin Hao wasn't guarding the herb garden, but a promise he had once made. The Dao Peak fell into silence once more. Qin Hao strode forward with his hands behind his back and faced the mountain-guarding ancestor of the Void Strike sect. His aura of being able to hold back 10,000 men by himself made others secretly praise him. What a matchless Sword King. At this moment, in front of the Taisui Mountain team, the Taisui Emperor was also shocked. Since Jiubiechio recognized Qin Hao by his sword intent, the Taisui Emperor, who had been to South Sky Peak, naturally recognized him. I never thought that Li Chuji of the Taoist sect would be the tribulation Sword Emperor of South Sky Peak. The Taisui Emperor took a few deep breaths. Qin Hao seemed to have sensed him. He casually looked over, and there seemed to be sharp sword chi shooting out from his eyes. He said, I've taken the initiative to come out now. Your Highness Taisui Emperor, do you want to teach me a lesson? In the Emperor's cave in the cemetery, Qin Hao had indeed threatened Song Zhonglao. Therefore, today the Taisui Emperor personally came to teach this arrogant disciple who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Of course, it would naturally be better if he could seize the inheritance during the chaos. Unfortunately, Ancestor Ji Kong didn't give the Taisui Emperor the chance to do so. He directly attacked and crushed the 3 sect leaders of the Dao sect. Now, there was a need for Qin Hao to repeat himself. Was the Taisui Mountain serious about teaching him a lesson? The Taisui Emperor, let out a dry laugh as he slowly returned to his original position in the sky above the dojo. It would be a piece of cake for him to deal with Li Chuji, but he didn't want to die against Tribulation Sword Emperor. After all, he had been to the South Sky Peak with Taoist Emperor Ji Kong. Only a wisp of sword chi flew out from the peak and severely injured both of them. In order to save face, the Taisui Emperor later told the elders of the sect that he and Tribulation Sword Emperor had a fierce battle. Both of them had their own merits, and it was not easy to defeat him completely. The Taisui Emperor didn't know how Taoist Emperor Ji Kong explained to the higher-ups of the sect after he returned. Anyway, that was what he said. But now, they were not on the South Sky Peak. They were under the watchful eyes of thousands of disciples of the 3 sects and the martial artists of the 15 Nanjiang counties. Look, the sky and the ground in the distance were densely packed with figures. How could he dare to attack Qin Hao for the 2nd time? Should he let Qin Hao strike again and send him back to the Taisui Mountain? How shameless could he be? Who on earth are you? The yellow-browed elder roared. As the grand patriarch of the Strikong sect, how could Qin Hao ignore him like this? If he hadn't seen Qin Hao personally suppress the injuries of Jiu Bieqiu and the other two, and if the Taisui Emperor hadn't shrunk back like a coward, the great patriarch of the Strikong sect would never have tolerated Qin Hao's rudeness. However, his intuition as a martial artist told him that this young man with sword flowing around him was by no means an ordinary person. He was at least a Renhuang, and his cultivation was even stronger than Jiu Bieqiu's. I'll give you a chance to choose. Leave or die. Qin Hao finally replied, but this sentence almost made the great patriarch of the Strikong sect explode with anger. The 7-kill pagoda in his hand suddenly shone with terrible light. He pointed at Qin Hao and roared, "What did you say? Great patriarch, this man is Tribulation Sword Emperor." At this time, Nieli stepped forward and introduced Qin Hao in a low voice. Tribulation Sword Emperor? When did this damned thing come out of Nanjiang City? The great patriarch of the Strikong sect asked seriously. Because he had been in seclusion all year round, he didn't know what had happened in Nanjiang City, nor did he know that the southern heavenly sacred peak, which the three sects had coveted for a long time, had been forcibly occupied. In short, this man is very strong. The corner of Nie Li's mouth twitched a few times. Damn thing? The great patriarch really dared to say that. How strong is he? Is he stronger than the old man? The great patriarch of the Strikong sect pointed at Qin Hao. He, Nie Rong, had become the first Renhuang in the Nanjiang area 200 years ago. Nieli closed his mouth and didn't dare to answer. What else could he say? He and the Taisui Emperor joined forces, but they couldn't even withstand one sword strike from Qin Hao. Without using the 7-kill pagoda, even the great patriarch couldn't do it. Walking forward silently, Nieli respectfully cupped his fists at Qin Hao and said, "My friend, you've hidden your strength well. I didn't expect you to lower yourself and become a lowly alchemist to take care of the herb garden on this mountain. If you're interested, the Strikong sect will welcome you at any time." Qin Hao waved his hand and interrupted. "Let's go. I don't want to kill. My friend, this has nothing to do with you. Why do you have to stand up for Jiu Bieqiu? No matter what he gives you, the Strikong sect is willing to give it 10 times more. Even the position of Deputy Mountain Master. As long as you nod your head, I, Nieli, am willing to be on an equal footing with Tribulation Sword Emperor." Nieli said, "On an equal footing with me? You're not qualified." Qin Hao tried to persuade him. "How dare you?" The great patriarch of the Strikong sect was furious. Who did he think the Strikong sect was? "Get out of here!" Qin Hao roared, and an extremely sharp sword, chi, flow suddenly came out of the void. Creak! The great patriarch of the Strikong sect clenched his fists and laughed. "Good, very good. The old man has been a Renhuang for 300 years, and you are the first person who dares to tell me to get out of here. Nieli, if you are afraid of this person, just step back. I will show you how our Strikong sect's Wei Palm tames humans and animals." Great patriarch. When Nieli heard this, he immediately tensed up. "Get out of here!" The great patriarch of the Strikong sect roared. "Tribulation Sword Emperor, the strength of the Nye family is far beyond your imagination. Take care of yourself." Nieli knew that the great patriarch was determined to fight, so he didn't try to stop him. He wasn't worried about the outcome of this battle, but there was one condition. If the great patriarch was injured, Tribulation Sword Emperor would pay an extremely heavy price, and he might even lose his life. Nieli stepped back, and so did Emperor Taisui. Both of them knew very well the power of Tribulation Sword Emperor's way of the sword. Of course, the great patriarch of the Strikong sect might not lose. Nie Rong held a supreme-grade imperial artifact, and the power he released was enough to shake a high-level Renhuang. The battle between the two sides would probably be quite fierce. They were evenly matched. Chapter 1683. In the sky, two figures floated opposite each other, one old and one young, staring at each other. On the ground, in the air, and even in the sky, far away from the Mountain of the Way, warriors stood there. Countless people watched the battle with keen eyes, looking forward to it. Great Elder Ji Kong and Emperor Jie Jian, two epic-making cultivators of Nanjiang City, were fighting. No one knew if the older generation of Renhuang would remain undefeated, or if the new generation of Emperor Jie Jian would surpass them. Everyone saw dazzling Renhuang light flowing around both of them. In the space around Great Elder Ji Kong, heavy muffled sounds were heard, as if countless palm prints were violently striking. The momentum was shocking. Qin Hao was surrounded by sword will. Traces of light formed by swordsmanship flashed, and a terrible sharp aura cut through the space. The sword light in his eyes was so strong that no one dared to look at him directly. His entire body seemed to have become the incarnation of the sword. Humph! Emperor Jie Jian of Nanjiang, Great Elder Ji Kong, snorted disdainfully. He raised his hand and swept it forward. The void roared, and an invisible force rolled forward. Sonic booms were heard, as if it could crush everything. It's just an empty title. I didn't admit it. Qin Hao's face was expressionless. The sword will around him resonated with the light of catastrophe. A beam of light pierced through at an extremely fast speed. With a bang, the pressure from the space exploded midway and dissipated into nothingness. Great Elder Ji Kong's tone was tough, but his attack was cautious. This attack was condensed by the will of Renhuang and did not incorporate any martial arts techniques. It was obviously a test. However, Qin Hao did not care about a mere will of Renhuang. He blocked it easily with a ray of sword will. Jiu Biechio's heart trembled. The three of them were trapped in the sword aura of Cao Sky Peak and felt the power of Emperor Jie Jian. However, the opponent was the great elder of the Ji Kong clan. How could Li Chuji be so casual when facing Nierong? Both of them were very strong. It seems that you do have some skills. No wonder Nieli is afraid of you. However, Nieli will never be able to reach the level of Old Man Kong's palm strike, even if he practiced for another 100 years. After Great Ancestor Strike, Kong tested the waters. He knew that the Tribulation Sword Sovereign was not much weaker than him and was worth taking seriously. Dazzling Renhuang light bloomed. Golden primordial chi rolled and raged. Countless warriors appeared around Great Elder Chi Kong, surrounding him in the center. There were more than 1,000 of them. These figures were ethereal and illusory. They were the condensation of Renhuang's will. At this moment, they moved in unison. Their palms opened and closed, and at the same time, they blasted a palm toward Qin Hao across the air. For a moment, there was a loud whistling sound, and a roar like muffled thunder rolled and roared. However, there was no trace of the light of the palm in the air. There was only the feeling of an overwhelming pressure that crazily swallowed and crushed forward. Ancestor's air-striking palm has improved again. Nieli praised. Just like the Tai Sui Mountain, the Nie clan's ancestor also had Emperor Yuan. The air-striking palm was passed down from then on. It was a set of extraordinary emperor techniques that could be used together with the bloodline of the clan members. It could injure others invisibly and was extremely powerful. Qin Hao felt the pressure getting closer and closer. The luster of flames rose in his eyes. His divine consciousness could see the dense palm energy flying in front of him. It pierced through the void and blasted toward his body. The air-striking sect has surpassed the Dao sect to become the overlord of Nanjiang. It's not an undeserved reputation. Nierong's palm technique was not simple. Renhuang cultivators borrowed the power of heaven and earth to release their might. Although they could injure others invisibly, in essence, the moment the attack was launched, it was still driven by primordial chi and martial arts techniques. Because the speed was too fast, others could not see it clearly. However, no Renhuang in the 4 regions of the Divine Wilderness could be like the Nie clan. At least, Qin Hao had not seen it before. If it were not for his special physique and eyes that were different from ordinary people, he could only tell when the attack was coming by his senses. He would not be able to see it. It turned out that the air-striking sect got its name from this. It was a pity that Great Ancestor Striking Kong had met Qin Hao. Otherwise, there were not many people in the same realm who could defeat the strike of air striking palm, except for the unblemished divine monk Huitong. Yishuihan probably cannot do it. Only Tsaiogwa, Sea Sand, Gu Kuei, and Lei Jiao, who were martial arts cultivators born with strong defense, could take it head-on. If it were Yu Qinyang and Chang Hello, they would have doubted their lives. Sword come. Qin Hao pinched his sword fingers, and the sword will merged with the light of catastrophe. He pointed forward. Strands of light of catastrophe drifted out from his body, forming dense threads that pierced forward. Every time a thread flashed, there would be a deafening explosion. Everyone saw from afar that in the space between Great Ancestor striking Kong and Tribulation Sword Emperor, countless rays of light exploded repeatedly. It was extremely turbulent like a storm. Mixed in such an attack, even Yu Biechio, Tai Sui Emperor, and Nieli would be crippled if not killed. Everyone was shocked. This attack was too terrifying. Palm of all heavens. Great Ancestor striking Kong saw that Qin Hao had withstood it. None of the palm forces could break through the blockade of sword chi. He roared and raised one of his palms above his head. Thousands of warriors around him imitated Great Ancestor striking Kong's action and also raised one of their palms above their heads. They resonated with each other, and the terrifying light of the palm shrouded the world. Then, the palm chi of countless phantoms madly converged into Great Ancestor striking Kong's palm. The light in his palm was enormous like a mountain. Then, the palm slammed down as if it could destroy all heavens. Qin Hao smiled faintly. Seeing all this, he also raised his sword fingers to the sky. Countless beams of light, of catastrophe, snaked up from his body and condensed into a divine sword. The sword light rushed into the sky and went against the momentum. With a boom, the giant palm that was pressing down was smashed into pieces. Both Renhuangs are so strong. All the warriors in Nanjiang witnessed the whole process. Their blood was boiling. It had been many years since they had seen such strong cultivators fight. You took the palm of all heavens of Old Man head-on. You are worthy of the title Sovereign of Catastrophe Sword. The earth-shaking sound slowly dissipated. Great Ancestor striking Kong said coldly. Qin Hao's sword was sharper than he had imagined. I don't care if I'm worthy of the title, but I don't know if Great Ancestor striking Kong is worthy of the title as well. Qin Hao said with a smile. 877 Hao Shu. Go ahead and try. Nie Rong stepped forward heavily. His imperial might shook the sky. 3 swords, Qin Hao said. I will only use 3 swords. If you can continue to stand and talk to me, Qin Hao paused. His eyes swept down and fell on Zhan Biechio and the other 2. He pointed at them and said, not only will I not intervene, but the 3 leaders of Haotian Taoism will also demonstrate in public that they eat feces while standing upside down. Why do you want us to eat feces? Shi Yongyan looked at Zhan Biechio and Bo Shang. If you have the ability, then make Chu Sen eat feces as well. The one fighting Nie Rong right now is you, Shi Yongyan, Zhan Biechio said. Who told you to talk too much? Bo Shang gloated as if eating feces had nothing to do with him. 3 swords? Ha ha, what a boast. Come, come, come. This old man can't wait to enjoy the wonderful demonstration of the 3 leaders of Haotian Taoism. Great Ancestor striking Kong patted his chest with one hand, indicating that he would stab there viciously. He would definitely make Nie Rong feel pain. Whoosh! The ear-piercing sound of the sword pierced the void. Without any warning, Qin Hao narrowed his eyes, and a beam of light flew out. It was a sword. Nieli didn't know how he managed to block it. It was too fast, and his mind was blank. He instinctively placed the 7 kills pagoda in front of his chest to protect his chest. In an instant, his body trembled as if his internal organs had been shaken. When he looked at Qin Hao again, his expression changed. He was so shocked that his liver and guts were about to burst. Boom! The giant sword fell down and went straight into the storm. The overbearing sword might shatter the storm. The endless sword will twisted and killed. Fragments of the Seven Kills pagoda slowly fell from the sky. The materials used to forge the top-grade imperial implement were so dazzling that the spectators felt as if their hearts were being shattered by the sword in the sky. Whoosh! Whoosh! Amidst an incomparably heavy snort, great ancestor Striking Kong's eyes were incomparably shocked. It was as if he had just taken a trip to the gates of hell. Nie Rong didn't die from this sword. It wasn't that Qin Hao held back, but because at this time, an incomparably noble and luxurious palanquin was slowly descending from the sky. A platinum radiance enveloped Nie Rong. The power of Emperor Yuan saved his life. What's supposed to come has finally come. Zhou Biaqiu looked up at the sky and watched the palanquin float down. Ever since he saw the Seven Kills pagoda in Nie Rong's hands, he knew that that person from the Striking Kong sect had returned. He was invited back by great ancestor Striking Kong. It seemed that today, the Dao sect still couldn't escape this calamity. Sherdong couldn't be saved. The fact that the Tribulation Sword Emperor had flown to the South Sky Peak with his extraordinary swordsmanship had long attracted the attention of the higher-ups of the Water Jade Holy Palace. Everyone in the Holy Palace knew about it. Moreover, Fairy of 100 Flowers, who was ranked 5th, had personally led a team to the South Sky Peak to visit the Tribulation Sword Emperor on behalf of the Holy Palace. As for the result, everyone knew. They didn't even go to the South Sky Peak and returned in disappointment. Fairy of 100 Flowers status was much higher than these four. After all, it was the first time they had seen the Tribulation Sword Emperor in person. Naturally, they were curious. However, after witnessing the power of Qin Hao's swordsmanship and how he had crushed ancestor Zhang Kong, they could understand why Fairy of 100 Flowers' visit had failed. The Tribulation Sword Emperor was indeed qualified to be proud. He had one foot in the Emperor's path. No wonder he had attracted the attention of the higher-ups and elders. Greetings, Granny C. As the geniuses landed, Ancestor Zhang Kong, Emperor Tai Sui, Emperor Zhang Kong, the three emperors of the Taoist sect, and even the countless martial artists in the distant void bowed respectfully. Granny C of the Water Jade Holy Palace. Granny C had a very special status in the Holy Palace. She was a servant in name, but in reality, she was equivalent to the mother of the Water Jade Empress. Every Water Jade Holy Maiden had been raised by Granny C since childhood. She was her wet nurse. Fairy of Qianning, who had met Qin Hao, was naturally among them. There were no men in the Water Jade Holy Palace. The higher-ups of the empire were all women. Some especially talented children, once selected to enter the Holy Palace, would no longer have any relationship with their family the day they left home. From then on, the children would belong to the Water Jade Empress. Even if their biological parents saw them, they could only silently bless them and force themselves not to acknowledge them. However, the children who were brought to the Holy Palace will be taken care of by Granny C. There was more than one Granny C in the Holy Palace. There were many others. Moreover, all of them had excellent physiques and could be said to be the most outstanding women in the Water Jade Holy Palace. After drinking their milk, the children of the Holy Palace's physical condition from childhood would far surpass their peers. There were no men in the Holy Palace. Granny C could not give birth and could not provide milk. This became a kind of trouble, or even shackle. The only solution was to let Granny C give birth and have sex with men. Of course, that was only a process. Granny C would not have any feelings and would passively endure everything. Forgive me for not agreeing, Nie Biaqiu replied. His will was the will of the Tao sect. In the past, the Saint Palace only took away talented girls. Now, they didn't even let off men. It was too overbearing. Although Nie Sipo didn't represent the Saint Palace and Sherdong couldn't enter the Saint Palace, Jibicho might really consider letting Sherdong go. After all, becoming a disciple of the Water Jade Empress was akin to ascending to the heavens in a single bound. However, Nye Sipo wanted Sherdong to change his surname to Nye because she wanted to kidnap him and give him to the Void-Striking sect. Hee, it seems like I'm too polite and you think I'm easy to bully. Will you be satisfied if I forcefully take the inheritance and turn Sherdong into a cripple? Nye Sipo's tone turned cold. Try it, Dong. Qin Haochao took a step forward. Suddenly, dense sword chi appeared in the air. The sword chi was arranged in an orderly manner, like the flashing of fish scales. Under the sunlight, it emitted an extremely sharp light. Formation with a thought. The goddess from the sacred palace named Shiming cried out in surprise. This method. Third year, don't be rude. Nyebyecho saw this, and the three of them flew over. They opened their arms and stood in front of Qin Hao in the sedan. Was he crazy? Fighting with Nye Sipo was equivalent to declaring war on the Saint Palace. The Water Jade Holy Empire dominated the southern world because of the Water Jade Sacred Palace. Even if it was a long time ago, when the Dao sect was at its peak, it would be extremely cautious when facing such an enemy. Moreover, the Dao sect's current strength was not even 1/10,000th of the past. Once they resisted, it would be like smashing an egg against a rock. Sword Dao, fake emperor. Good. I don't know how many years have passed. I almost forgot how to fight. The spirit of the younger generation is praiseworthy. Forget it. I won't force you. But you hurt my brother first. I must return those 3 swords. The master of the geniuses seemed to be worried about something. She paused for a few seconds and said, 3 palms. After 3 palms, if you can still stand and talk to me, Nye Sipo, will turn around and leave. Do you dare? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.